There is a moment in the very first episode of Regular Show where Mordecai and Rigby find a magical keyboard. They do not know where it came from. They do not understand its rules. They just start pressing buttons, and things happen. A man gets sent to the moon. Reality bends. The walls between the ordinary and the impossible dissolve without warning. And the show treats all of this with the same casual energy as two friends arguing over whose turn it is to take out the trash. That moment tells you everything you need to know about Regular Show. Not because of what it does, but because of where it came from. Because Regular Show did not appear out of nowhere. It was built, piece by piece, from the bones of other stories. From movies most of its young audience had never seen. From shows that aired before most of its viewers were born. From video games, from anime, from British comedies, from cult horror films, from obscure arcade cabinets, from the specific cultural memory of a man who grew up in the flatlands of Hanford, California, with nothing to do but watch VHS tapes and play Sega Genesis until the sun came up. Regular Show is not a show that borrowed from pop culture. Regular Show is a show that was made of pop culture. Every frame, every joke, every escalation from the mundane to the cosmic carries the fingerprints of something else. Something older. Something that J.G. Quintel watched or played or listened to when he was young and bored and looking for a reason to feel something. That is what this video is about. Not a list of Easter eggs. Not a trivia game. This is about tracing the DNA of one of the most beloved animated shows of the 21st century back to its sources. Every show, every movie, every game, every piece of music that Regular Show absorbed and transformed into something new. Because once you see where it all came from, you do not just understand Regular Show better. You understand why it worked, why it felt different, why a show about two slackers at a park could make you feel things that no amount of plot complexity could replicate. The answer is in the borrowing. The answer is in what Quintel chose to take, and more importantly, what he chose to leave behind. Welcome to Velvo. Get comfortable, settle in, turn the lights down low. And if you have not subscribed yet, it really does help us keep making these. Let us get into it. To understand what Regular Show copied, you have to start before Regular Show existed. You have to go back to a dorm room at the California Institute of the Arts in the early 2000s, where a young animation student named James Garland Quintel was pulling all-nighters and making short films with his friends. CalArts had a tradition. Students would gather at midnight, pull random words out of a hat, and then race back to their desks to make a short film in 48 hours, based on whatever word they drew. It was chaotic, it was exhausting, and it was the crucible in which Regular Show was forged. In the spring of 2005, this process produced a short film called The Naive Man from Lollyland. Quintel wrote it, animated it, and spent roughly 8 months refining it after that initial 48-hour sprint. The film is about an ambassador from a place called Lollyland who visits the United States for the first time. Things go wrong when he tries to pay for a meal with lollipops. The character is sweet, wide-eyed, almost painfully innocent. He does not understand how the real world works. He floats through it with a kind of bewildered grace that makes you want to protect him from everything sharp and loud and mean. That character became Pops. If you have watched Regular Show, you know Pops. The tall, lollipop-headed man who lives in the house at the center of the park. The one who speaks in an old-fashioned way, who finds joy in simple things, who seems to exist in a slightly different reality than everyone around him. Pops is not just a character Quintel invented for a television show. Pops is a character Quintel invented in a college dorm room, years before Cartoon Network ever greenlit anything. The Naive Man from Lollyland won both the Producer's Choice Award and the Student Animator Award at the 2005 Nicktoons Film Festival. It received international attention after being broadcast on Nicktoons Network, and it planted the seed for everything that followed. But the more important CalArts film, the one that truly reveals the DNA of Regular Show, came a year later. In 2006, Quintel made a short called 2 in the AM/PM. The premise is simple. Two clerks are working the night shift at a gas station on Halloween. One of them offers the other a piece of candy. The candy, it turns out, contains acid. Not marijuana, as one of them initially claims. Acid. And then the hallucinations begin. This is where it gets strange, and where it gets important. The two clerks in 2 in the AM/PM are voiced by and visually modeled after Quintel himself and his CalArts friend Sam Marin. And during their acid trip, the characters transform. One of them becomes a blue jay. The other becomes a gumball machine. The blue jay is Mordecai. The gumball machine is Benson. They are not real characters in the short film. They are drug-induced hallucinations. The protagonists of Regular Show, the show that would air on Cartoon Network for 8 seasons and 244 episodes, began their existence as figments of an animated acid trip in a CalArts student film. Think about what that means. The entire foundation of Regular Show is built on a piece of content that could never, under any circumstances, air on Cartoon Network. The show's origin story is literally about drug use. Quintel took that transgressive, adult-oriented material and found a way to translate its energy, its surreal logic, its willingness to let reality collapse at any moment, into something that could air at 8:15 on a Monday night. He kept the chaos. He kept the sudden escalations. He kept the feeling that anything could happen at any time for any reason. He just removed the drugs and replaced them with magical keyboards and haunted videotapes, and Death himself showing up to play arm wrestling. That is the first thing Regular Show copied. It copied itself. It took its own forbidden origins and laundered them through the machinery of children's television until the edges were soft enough to broadcast, but the heart was still wild enough to matter. And that process, that act of taking something raw and reshaping it for a new context, while keeping its essential spirit, is exactly what Quintel would do with every other piece of pop culture he absorbed into the show. Many of the characters on Regular Show trace back to these CalArts films. Mordecai and Benson came from 2 in the AM/PM. Pops came from the naive man from Lollyland. The show was not built from scratch on a whiteboard in a writer's room. It was assembled from pieces that Quintel had been carrying around for years, testing them, refining them, figuring out what worked and what did not. By the time Cartoon Network greenlit Regular Show in August 2009, Quintel already knew who these characters were. He had been living with them since college. The agreement upon the premise was straightforward. The series would be about 2 park groundskeepers, Mordecai, a 6-foot blue jay, and Rigby, a hyperactive raccoon, who try to entertain themselves at their jobs while doing anything they can to avoid work and escape their everyday boredom. Simple, relatable, and loaded with potential for exactly the kind of surreal escalation that Quintel had been practicing since his CalArts days. The show premiered on September 6, 2010, with an episode called The Power. It ran for 8 seasons. It ended on January 16, 2017, with a 33-minute finale called A Regular Epic Final Battle. And in between those 2 dates, it became one of the most reference-dense, homage-heavy, lovingly derivative shows in the history of American animation. But the CalArts films were just the beginning. The real sources, the ones that shaped the tone and texture and soul of Regular Show, came from somewhere else entirely. They came from across an ocean, from a country where the humor is darker, the absurdism is more committed, and the line between comedy and nightmare is deliberately, gleefully blurred. There is a specific kind of influence that does not announce itself. It does not arrive in the form of a direct reference or a visual homage or a character design that mirrors something from another show. It arrives in the rhythm of the jokes, in the willingness to let a scene get uncomfortable, in the way a show handles the gap between what is normal and what is completely, irreversibly insane. That is the kind of influence the Mighty Boosh had on Regular Show. J.G. Quintel had a British roommate at CalArts. This is one of those small, accidental details that ended up reshaping the trajectory of an entire television series. The roommate introduced Quintel to a slate of British comedies that most American animation students in the mid-2000s would never have encountered on their own. The League of Gentlemen, The IT Crowd, Little Britain, The Office, and, most importantly, The Mighty Boosh. The Mighty Boosh is a BBC comedy created by Julian Barrett and Noel Fielding. It premiered in 2004 and ran for 3 series. The show follows 2 characters, Howard Moon and Vince Noir, who work at a zoo and find themselves in increasingly surreal situations. Howard is the serious one, the one who thinks he is more talented and more important than he actually is. Vince is the flashy one, the one who cares more about his hair and his outfits than about anything resembling responsibility. Together, they stumble through adventures that involve talking animals, musical interludes, and villains who operate on dream logic, rather than anything resembling narrative coherence. If that dynamic sounds familiar, it should. Mordecai and Rigby are not Howard and Vince, but they live in the same neighborhood. Mordecai is the one who wants to be taken seriously, who has aspirations, who sees himself as the responsible one, even when he is clearly not. Rigby is the chaotic one, the one who acts on impulse, who drags them both into trouble, who treats consequences as something that happens to other people. The dynamic is not identical, but the architecture is the same. Two friends, one who thinks he is the adult, one who refuses to grow up, and a world around them that responds to their laziness and their ambition with equal amounts of cosmic punishment. But the influence of the Mighty Boosh goes deeper than character dynamics. It lives in the tone. The Mighty Boosh is a show that will be making you laugh one moment and then, without any shift in music or lighting or performance, show you something genuinely unsettling. A character will die. A villain will do something cruel. The comedy does not stop for the darkness. The darkness is the comedy, and that is exactly how regular show operates. Think about Over the Top, Season 2, Episode 21. It aired in 2011. In this episode, Rigby challenges Skips to an arm wrestling match. Skips, who possesses supernatural strength, accepts, and then Skips accidentally kills Rigby. Not injures him, not knocks him out, kills him. Rigby dies in an arm wrestling match at a park. The show does not treat this as a cliffhanger or a dramatic twist. It treats it as a problem to be solved. Skips has to challenge Death himself to an arm wrestling contest to win Rigby's soul back. The episode is named after the 1987 Sylvester Stallone film about underground arm wrestling competitions. It is simultaneously a parody of an 80s action movie, a story about a character literally dying, and a comedy about workplace relationships. Those tones should not coexist. They do, because Quintel learned from the Mighty Boosh that they could. The dark humor seeped into his brain. Quintel has said as much. Shows like The League of Gentlemen, Little Britain, and The Mighty Boosh, he found hilarious for doing dark jokes about characters getting killed or people doing things they should not be doing. That sensibility is everywhere in regular show. Characters die regularly. The stakes escalate from zero to existential in seconds. A disagreement about who gets the last slice of pizza can end with the fabric of reality tearing open. And the show never flinches. It never pauses to acknowledge how insane things have gotten. It just keeps going, with the same casual energy it had when Mordecai and Rigby were sitting on the couch arguing about nothing. That is not an American animation tradition. American cartoons in the 2000s, even the good ones, tended to signal their tonal shifts. When things got serious, the music changed. When things got dark, the lighting shifted. Regular show does not do that. It maintains the same flat, almost indifferent presentation, whether Mordecai is making a sandwich or whether a demon is consuming the park. That flatness, that refusal to tell the audience how to feel, is British. It is specifically Mighty Boosh British, and it is one of the most important things regular show ever copied. Before we move on, if you are enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. But the Mighty Boosh was not the only show that taught Quintel how to build a comedy around two friends who cannot stop getting into trouble. There is an older tradition, an American one, and it starts with two animated teenagers sitting on a couch, watching music videos, and saying things that would get them expelled from any school in the country. Beavis and Butthead premiered on MTV in 1993. Created by Mike Judge, the show follows two teenage boys who are defined entirely by their apathy, their lack of intelligence, and their ability to find entertainment in the absolute minimum. They sit on a couch, they watch TV, they make crude comments, and occasionally they leave the couch and interact with a world that has no idea what to do with them. The show was revolutionary not because of what it depicted, but because of what it refused to provide. There is no character growth in Beavis and Butthead. There is no moral. There is no lesson learned at the end of the episode. The characters are the same at the end as they were at the beginning, and the show does not apologize for that. Quintel grew up watching Beavis and Butthead. He has cited it as a direct influence, and the DNA is unmistakable. Mordecai and Rigby are not as crude as Beavis and Butthead. They are not as stupid. They have moments of genuine tenderness and self-awareness that Judge's characters never approach, but the fundamental premise is the same. Two friends, a couch, an overwhelming desire to avoid anything that resembles effort, and a world that keeps forcing them to engage with it anyway. The specific innovation that Beavis and Butthead introduced, and that Regular Show adopted, is the idea that inaction can be the engine of a story. Most comedies are about characters who want something and pursue it. Beavis and Butthead is about characters who want nothing and have things happen to them anyway. Regular Show takes that premise and adds a twist. Mordecai and Rigby do not want nothing. They want very specific, very small things. They want to watch a movie. They want to win a video game. They want to eat a grilled cheese sandwich. But the show treats these tiny desires with the same narrative weight that other shows reserve for saving the world. And then, inevitably, the pursuit of these tiny desires does end up threatening the world. That escalation pattern, from the trivially mundane to the cosmically catastrophic, is one of Regular Show's signature moves. And it would not exist without Beavis and Butthead proving that you could build an entire show around characters who just want to sit on a couch. But Quintel did not just draw from Mike Judge. He also drew from the other great animated influence of his childhood, The Simpsons. The Simpsons is such a pervasive influence on American animation that it is almost invisible. Every animated comedy that came after it exists in its shadow. But the specific thing Regular Show took from The Simpsons is worth naming precisely, because it is not what most people would guess. It is not the family dynamic. It is not the satirical edge. It is not the celebrity guest voices or the couch gags or the catchphrases. What Regular Show took from The Simpsons is the anthology format. The Simpsons pioneered the Treehouse of Horror specials. Starting in 1990, these annual Halloween episodes broke the show's format entirely. Instead of a single story, each Treehouse of Horror presents 3 self-contained horror or science fiction segments. The segments are non-canon. Characters can die. Rules can be broken. The show can do things it would never do in a regular episode, and the whole thing is framed by the characters telling scary stories to each other. Regular Show adopted this format wholesale with Terror Tales of the Park. The first installment appeared in Season 3, and the series continued the tradition annually. Each Terror Tales of the Park is a 30-minute special containing 3 horror segments. The segments are non-canon. Characters can die. The whole thing is framed by the characters telling scary stories. The structural similarity is not subtle. It is not an homage buried in the margins. It is a direct adoption of The Simpsons format, applied to Regular Show's cast and sensibility. But here is what makes it interesting. Regular Show does not just copy the format. It uses the format to do something The Simpsons stopped doing years earlier. In the original Treehouse of Horror specials, the framing device was essential. The Simpson children sat in their treehouse and told each other stories. The frame gave the segments context and weight. Later, The Simpsons dropped the framing device but kept the name. The specials became 3 unconnected segments with no narrative glue holding them together. Regular Show kept the frame. Every Terror Tales of the Park has the characters physically present, telling stories, reacting to each other's stories, arguing about whose story is the scariest. The frame is not just structural, it is character work. You learn things about Mordecai and Rigby and Muscle Man and Benson from the stories they choose to tell, and the way they react to being scared. The format is borrowed, the execution is original, and that pattern, taking a borrowed structure and using it to reveal character in ways the original never did, is one of Regular Show's most consistent creative strategies. There is another influence from Quintel's childhood that shaped Regular Show in ways that are less obvious, but arguably more fundamental. It did not come from television. It did not come from movies. It came from a Sega Genesis cartridge. Quintel often played the video game Toe Jam and Earl when he was a child. He has described it as the perfect platform for what would eventually become Regular Show's protagonists. Toe Jam and Earl, released in 1991, is a game about 2 alien hip-hop artists who crash land on Earth and have to find the pieces of their broken spaceship. Toe Jam is the tall, thin one. Earl is the short, round one. They wander through a bizarre version of Earth filled with hostile humans and random hazards, collecting presents that contain unknown items, some helpful and some dangerous. The parallels to Mordecai and Rigby are structural. 2 characters of different sizes and temperaments, wandering through a world that is familiar on the surface but constantly threatening to become bizarre, encountering obstacles that range from the mundane to the surreal. ToeJam is cooler and more competent, like Mordecai. Earl is goofier and more impulsive, like Rigby. The game's tone, which blends relaxed exploration with sudden danger, maps almost perfectly onto regular show's narrative rhythm. But the deeper influence is in the game's approach to escalation. In ToeJam and Earl, you never know what is in a present until you open it. A present might contain rocket skates that send you flying off the edge of the level. It might contain a tomato rain that damages everything on screen. It might contain extra lives. The game teaches you that any interaction, no matter how small, could spiral into something completely uncontrollable. That is regular show's entire operating principle. Mordecai picks up a keyboard. Rigby rents a videotape. Someone opens a fortune cookie. And then reality breaks. Video games were not a minor influence on regular show. They were baked into its structure. Street Fighter and Shadowrun, both of which Quintel played extensively as a child, also contributed to the show's DNA. The fighting game logic of Street Fighter, where every conflict can be resolved through direct, physical confrontation with clear winners and losers, shows up constantly in regular show's climactic scenes. The cyberpunk weirdness of Shadowrun, where fantasy and technology collide in unexpected ways, echoes in the show's willingness to mix magic and science without explanation or apology. The episode High Score, Season 2, Episode 7, aired on February 7, 2011, makes the video game influence explicit. Mordecai and Rigby discover an arcade game called Broken Bones and decide to beat the universe record. The current record holder is a character named Garrett Bobby Ferguson, a giant floating head who shows up to defend his score. Garrett Bobby Ferguson is a direct parody of Billy Mitchell, the real-world video game champion who held records on Pac-Man and Donkey Kong and was portrayed in the 2007 documentary The King of Kong, A Fistful of Quarters. The character design mirrors Mitchell's appearance. The personality mirrors Mitchell's arrogance. And the episode's conflict mirrors the documentary's central tension between a scrappy underdog and a seemingly untouchable champion. The real-world consequences of this homage are worth noting. Billy Mitchell actually sued Cartoon Network in 2015 for using his likeness without permission. The case was thrown out of court, and then, in a twist that regular show's writers could not have predicted but certainly would have appreciated, Mitchell's actual gaming records were stripped from the Twin Galaxies leaderboards in 2018 after evidence emerged that he had cheated to achieve his Donkey Kong scores. The man regular show parodied as a villainous, arrogant fraud turned out to be, in reality, a fraud. The show did not just reference pop culture. In this case, it accidentally predicted it. The Broken Bones arcade game itself appears to be based on the classic NES games Excitebike and Mach Rider. The visual style, the gameplay mechanics, the retro aesthetic, all point back to the 8-bit era that Quintel grew up playing. This is not just a reference for the sake of a reference. The game feels real within the show because it is modeled on games that actually existed. The specificity of the homage gives it weight. When Mordecai and Rigby play Broken Bones, you believe it is a real game because it behaves like real games from that era behaved. That specificity is one of regular show's great strengths, and it is directly connected to the show's relationship with its source material. Quintel did not just throw in vague references to retro stuff. He referenced specific games, specific movies, specific songs from specific decades. And that specificity is what separates regular show's homages from the kind of lazy pop culture name-dropping that other shows rely on. When regular show references something, it does not just mention it. It builds an episode around it. It understands what made the original work and translates that understanding into animation. But the video game references, as pervasive as they are, represent only one layer of regular show's pop culture archaeology. The deepest layer, the one that shapes the most episodes and produces the most memorable moments, comes from movies. Specifically, movies from the 1980s. And the show's relationship with those movies is not casual, it is obsessive. J.G. Quintel has spoken openly about why the 1980s loom so large in regular show. He grew up in Hanford, California, a small city in the San Joaquin Valley where, by his own account, the geography is kind of flat, and there was not a ton to do. When you grow up in a place like that, your entertainment options narrow to whatever is available in your living room. VHS tapes, cable television, the movies that happen to be in rotation at the local video store. For Quintel, Those movies were overwhelmingly from the 1980s. Action films, horror films, science fiction films. The kinds of movies that were designed to be watched on a Saturday night with the lights off and the volume up. Movies that valued spectacle and atmosphere over nuance and subtlety. Those movies did not just entertain Quintel. They became part of his creative vocabulary. And when he built Regular Show, he built it in their image. The first and most obvious example is Over the Top. The episode takes its name directly from the 1987 Sylvester Stallone film about a truck driver who competes in underground arm wrestling tournaments to win custody of his son. The Stallone film is not a good movie by most critical standards. It is melodramatic, formulaic, and relies entirely on the audience accepting that arm wrestling is the most important thing in the world. But Regular Show does not reference it ironically. It does not make fun of Over the Top. It absorbs the film's emotional logic and applies it to its own characters. In the Regular Show episode, Skips accidentally kills Rigby in an arm wrestling match and must challenge Death himself to win Rigby's soul back. The stakes are absurd. The setup is absurd. But the episode plays it straight. Skips is genuinely devastated by what he has done. Death is genuinely threatening. The arm wrestling match is genuinely tense. Regular Show takes a cheesy 80s movie and removes the cheese but keeps the sincerity. That is not parody. That is alchemy. Then there is Stick Hockey, the first episode of Season 3, which aired on September 19, 2011. This episode is a love letter to Bloodsport, the 1988 martial arts film starring Jean-Claude Van Damme. In Bloodsport, Van Damme's character enters an illegal underground fighting tournament and must face off against Chong Li, a brutal champion played by Bolo Yeung. In Stick Hockey, Benson enters an underground stick hockey tournament and must face off against a character named Chong, whose personality and appearance are directly modeled on Bolo Yeung's portrayal of Chong Li. The character's name is not even disguised. Chong. The homage is brazen, almost confrontational in its directness, and yet it works, because the episode does not just steal the surface details, it steals the emotional arc. Benson, like Van Damme's character, is fighting for something personal. He has something to prove. The tournament is not just a game, it is a crucible. And the villain is not just an opponent, he is a mirror, reflecting everything the hero is afraid of becoming. This is the pattern that repeats throughout Regular Show's relationship with 80s action cinema. The show does not just reference these movies. It steals their hearts. It identifies the emotional engine that makes each film work, strips away the big budgets and the star power and the production value, and transplants that engine into an 11-minute cartoon about a blue jay and a raccoon. The result is something that should not work but does. Something that feels simultaneously like a joke and like a genuine emotional experience. Fortune Cookie, Season 3, Episode 13, aired on January 23, 2012, takes this approach to Big Trouble in Little China, John Carpenter's 1986 martial arts fantasy film. In the film, Kurt Russell plays a truck driver who stumbles into a supernatural conflict in San Francisco's Chinatown, where he must face off against David Lopan, an ancient sorcerer voiced by James Hong. In Fortune Cookie, Benson gambles the park away to an evil sorcerer called the Warlock, who looks exactly like David Lopan and is voiced by James Hong himself. The same actor, playing essentially the same character. In an 11-minute cartoon on Cartoon Network, the episode does not wink at the audience. It does not say, "Hey, remember Big Trouble in Little China?" It just gives you David Lopan as a Regular Show villain and trusts that the audience either gets it or does not. Either way, the episode works. If you recognize the reference, you get an extra layer of appreciation. If you do not, you still get a fully functional story about Benson losing the park in a card game and having to win it back from a supernatural entity. That trust in the audience is one of the most important things Regular Show copied from 80s cinema. The movies of the 1980s did not explain themselves. They did not pause to make sure the audience was following the mythology or understanding the rules of the supernatural world. They just threw you in and expected you to keep up. Regular Show does the same thing. When a magical keyboard appears in the first episode, nobody explains where it came from or how it works. When Death shows up to play arm wrestling, nobody stops to question why Death would agree to such a thing. The show operates on 80s movie logic. If it is cool, it happens. If it is dramatic, it is real. Questions are for later, or never. The horror movie references are just as pervasive. and just as lovingly executed. Grave Sites, Season 2, Episode 19, aired on May 9, 2011, is the show's most direct homage to the Evil Dead franchise. In the episode, Mordecai and Rigby organize a scary movie night at the park's abandoned cemetery. They rent a film called Zombocalypse 3D and set up a projector among the gravestones. The movie within the episode is itself a reference to multiple 80s horror films, primarily Dawn of the Dead and The Evil Dead. The unnamed hero in Zombocalypse carries a boomstick, dispenses one-liners, and fights the undead in a cabin. He is Ash Williams in Everything But Name, Bruce Campbell's signature character, translated into a few seconds of background animation and played for both laughs and genuine suspense. But Grave Sites goes further than simple reference. When the projector malfunctions, the zombies from the movie come to life in the cemetery. The boundary between fiction and reality dissolves, which is itself an Evil Dead reference. In Evil Dead 2, the horror becomes increasingly meta, with the film questioning the boundary between Sam Raimi's camera and the demonic forces within the story. Grave Sites does the same thing. The movie within the show becomes the threat within the show. The reference is not decoration, it is structure. The entire episode is built on the Evil Dead's central innovation, the idea that horror can bleed through the screen. The show's relationship with Stephen King's work is subtler but equally present. The episode featuring a possessed, malevolent car draws from Christine, King's 1983 novel about a 1958 Plymouth Fury that seems to have a mind of its own, which was adapted into a film by John Carpenter the same year. Regular Show does not recreate Christine's plot point by point. Instead, it absorbs the concept, the idea that an inanimate object can become malevolent, and applies it to its own world. This is consistent with Regular Show's approach to all its horror references. It does not just copy the monster, it copies the fear. Before we move on, if you are enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The horror references extend beyond specific films into a broader relationship with the genre itself. Regular Show understands something about horror that many animated shows miss entirely. Horror is not about the monster. Horror is about the moment before the monster appears. The silence, the stillness, the feeling that something is wrong but you cannot quite identify what it is. Regular Show deploys that feeling constantly, even in episodes that are not explicitly horror-themed. There is a version of Meet Your Maker, Season 1, Episode 6, which aired on October 11, 2010, that could be played as straightforward comedy. Mordecai and Rigby burn the hot dogs for the park barbecue and have to go into the walk-in freezer to get more. But the episode does not play it that way. The freezer is dark. The hot dogs are alive. They are malevolent. They want revenge for their fallen brethren. The leader of the hot dogs was voiced by Tim Curry, an actor whose filmography includes some of the most iconic horror and villain performances of the 80s and 90s. The episode is funny. It is also, in certain moments, genuinely unsettling. That duality is not accidental. It is borrowed directly from the 80s horror tradition, where films like An American Werewolf in London and Fright Night proved that horror and comedy could coexist not just in the same film, but in the same scene. There is a specific quality to the way Regular Show handles its horror that deserves attention. The show never commits fully to being scary. It never abandons comedy for atmosphere, but it also never fully abandons atmosphere for comedy. It sits in the gap between the two, maintaining both tones simultaneously, refusing to choose one over the other. That refusal is itself a reference. It is a recreation of the tonal ambiguity that defined the best horror comedies of the 1980s. Films like Ghostbusters, Gremlins, and The Return of the Living Dead all operated in that same gap, and they remain beloved precisely because they never resolved the tension between their two impulses. Regular Show learned that lesson and applied it to animation. The result is a show that can make you laugh and make you uneasy in the same breath, which is a much harder trick than it looks. But the 80s movie influence on Regular Show extends beyond action and horror. It reaches into every genre the decade produced, including the genres that are harder to categorize: the buddy comedy, the road movie, the fish-out-of-water story, the underdog sports narrative. Regular Show borrows from all of them, and it borrows with the same combination of shamelessness and sincerity that defines its best episodes. Weekend at Benson's is the 12th episode of Season 3. It aired on January 16, 2012. The title is a direct reference to Weekend at Bernie's, the 1989 comedy about two young employees who discover their boss has been murdered and spend an entire weekend pretending he is still alive. In the regular show episode, Mordecai and Rigby accidentally knock Benson unconscious and must figure out what to do with him before he wakes up and fires them. The premise is not just similar to Weekend at Bernie's. It is Weekend at Bernie's, transplanted into the world of the park, with Benson standing in for the dead boss. The comedy operates on the same principle, the absurdity of trying to maintain the illusion that an unconscious person is functioning normally. But here is what regular show does, that Weekend at Bernie's does not. It uses the premise as character development. The episode introduces Audrey, Benson's neighbor and eventual love interest. While Mordecai and Rigby are panicking about their unconscious boss, the episode quietly sets up a romantic subplot for Benson that will recur throughout the series. The borrowed premise is not just a vehicle for comedy. It is a vehicle for storytelling. The reference gives the episode its structure, but the original character work gives it its heart. This is regular show at its most sophisticated, using someone else's idea as a scaffold and then building something genuinely new on top of it. The show's borrowing from 80s culture is not limited to plot structures and character dynamics. It extends to the show's entire aesthetic sensibility. Regular show is set in a vaguely contemporary world, but the technology and cultural references skew heavily toward the 1980s. Characters use cassette tapes, not smartphones. They play arcade games, not online multiplayer. They watch VHS tapes, not streaming services. The park itself feels like a relic of a pre-digital era, a place where time moves slowly, and entertainment requires physical objects and physical effort. Quintel has explained this aesthetic choice in interviews. He loves using 80s technology in his shows because that was the technology of his childhood. The cassette tapes and arcade machines are not just props. They are emotional touchstones. They evoke a specific feeling, a specific relationship with entertainment that has been largely erased by digital technology. When Mordecai and Rigby fight over a VHS tape, the physicality of that object matters. You can hold it. You can break it. You can lose it. Digital content is abstract. 80s content is concrete. And that concreteness gives regular shows' stories a tactile quality that most modern animated shows lack. The music reinforces this aesthetic constantly. Caffeinated Concert Tickets, the third episode of Season 1, which aired on September 20th, 2010, features Loverboys working for the weekend during a montage of Mordecai and Rigby doing yard work. This was the first licensed song to appear in the series, and it set the tone for everything that followed. Regular show uses 80s rock music not as ironic commentary, but as genuine emotional accompaniment. The songs are not played for laughs. They are played because they fit. Because the energy of 80s arena rock, the bombast, the sincerity, the shameless emotionalism, matches the energy of regular show's most heightened moments. Death Punchies, the fourth episode of Season 1, uses You're the Best Around from the Karate Kid soundtrack during a training montage. Again, not ironically, the montage is played straight. Rigby is learning Death Kwon Do. He is training. He is preparing for a fight. And the music tells you that this training matters, that this fight is important, that the stakes are real, even though the stakes are literally just winning a punching game against your friend. The 80s music gives regular show permission to take its smallest stories seriously. It says, this matters, even when it should not. Even when the logical part of your brain knows that a raccoon learning martial arts to win at punchies is not important. The music overrides that logic. It makes you feel what the characters feel. And that is exactly what 80s movie soundtracks were designed to do. The show's relationship with 80s music goes beyond licensed tracks. The original score often incorporates synthesizer-driven compositions that evoke the era's film soundtracks. The episode Gary's Synthesizer makes this influence explicit by building an entire story around a synthesizer duel, with Gary and his evil half-brother David battling for the throne of a place called Synthos. The episode is simultaneously a parody of 80s fantasy films and a genuine celebration of synthesizer music as an art form. It treats the synth-driven soundtrack not as a curiosity or a nostalgia trip, but as something with real emotional and narrative power. This is the key to understanding everything regular show copied from the 1980s. It was not copying the surface. It was not referencing the decade for the sake of generating recognition in the audience. It was copying the feeling. The feeling of watching a VHS tape at midnight. The feeling of hearing a synth pad swell under a montage sequence. The feeling of a world where every small conflict could escalate into something mythic, where two friends arguing about nothing could end up saving the universe. That feeling is specific to the 1980s, to a decade that treated popular entertainment with an unself-conscious sincerity that later decades would learn to be embarrassed by. Regular Show is not embarrassed by any of it. Regular Show loves the 80s the way a child loves the first movie that ever made them feel something. Completely, unconditionally, without irony or distance or apology. And that love, that willingness to take borrowed material seriously, is what separates Regular Show from the dozens of other animated shows that reference pop culture. Family Guy references movies. Robot Chicken references movies. Dozens of Adult Swim shows reference movies, but they reference them from a position of superiority. They look down at their source material and say, "Can you believe this existed?" Regular Show looks at its source material and says, "Can you believe how great this was?" The difference in posture changes everything. It is the difference between a tribute and a roast. Regular Show is always, always paying tribute. There is a moment in Rage Against the TV, the 8th episode of Season 2, that crystallizes this perfectly. Mordecai and Rigby are playing a beat-em-up video game. They reach the final level, and then their television breaks. The rest of the episode is about their desperate quest to find a new TV so they can finish the game. The beat-em-up they are playing is a direct homage to Double Dragon, the 1987 arcade game where two brothers fight their way through street gangs to rescue a kidnapped woman. The game within the show features characters who are dead ringers for Billy and Jimmy Lee, the Double Dragon protagonists, right down to their blue and red outfits. The unbeatable final boss bears a striking resemblance to Andor from Final Fight, another Capcom beat-em-up from the arcade era. But the episode is not really about the game references. It is about the feeling of needing to finish something, of being so close to the end that the idea of stopping is physically painful. Anyone who grew up playing arcade games or early console games knows that feeling. There were no save points. There were no continues. If you turned the game off, you lost everything. The urgency of Rage Against the TV comes not from the game's content, but from the game's form. From the way old games demanded your time and attention in a way that modern games do not. Regular Show is referencing Double Dragon. But what it is actually copying is the emotional experience of playing Double Dragon. The fear of losing progress. The determination to see it through. The bond between two players who are sharing that experience in real time. That distinction matters. It is the distinction between reference and resonance. A reference says, "I know about this thing." Resonance says, "I know how this thing made you feel." Regular Show consistently aims for resonance. It does not just show you a Double Dragon-style game. It makes you remember what it felt like to play one. It does not just name-drop The Big Lebowski. It makes you feel the same things The Big Lebowski makes you feel. Skip Strikes, the 3rd episode of Season 3, is the show's love letter to The Big Lebowski, the Coen brothers' 1998 cult classic about a laid-back bowler who gets entangled in a kidnapping plot. The episode features a bowling tournament where the park team, the Park Strikers, must face off against the magical elements, a team composed of villains from previous episodes including Death, Gary, and a Guardian of Eternal Youth. The dialogue includes direct lifts from The Big Lebowski, most notably the line, "Yeah, that is just your opinion, man," and the recurring claim that someone is out of their element. But the Lebowski references are not just verbal. The episode captures the film's central tension, the gap between how seriously the characters take bowling and how absurd their situation actually is. In The Big Lebowski, the dude is a man who wants nothing more than to bowl with his friends, but the world keeps pulling him into conflicts that are too big and too complicated for someone like him. In Skip Strikes, the bowling tournament is simultaneously a low-stakes recreational activity and a life-or-death confrontation with supernatural forces. The characters take it completely seriously. The show takes it completely seriously. And the comedy comes not from mocking their seriousness, but from the gap between the activity and the stakes. That is pure Coen brothers. That is the exact comedic frequency The Big Lebowski operates on, and Regular Show reproduces it with startling fidelity. Before we move on, if you are enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. There is a thread that connects all of these movie references, and it is worth making explicit. Regular Show does not reference movies randomly. It references movies that share a specific quality. They take small things seriously. Over the Top takes arm wrestling seriously. Bloodsport takes underground fighting seriously. The Big Lebowski takes bowling seriously. Weekend at Bernie's takes a weekend party seriously. These are not movies about saving the world or preventing a catastrophe. They are movies about people who care deeply about something that the rest of the world considers trivial. And that is exactly what Regular Show is about. Mordecai and Rigby care deeply about things that the rest of the world considers trivial. Winning a video game, getting concert tickets, eating a specific sandwich. The show treats those desires with the same narrative weight that a James Bond film gives to preventing nuclear war. And the movies it references are the ones that taught it how to do that. This is not just a stylistic choice. It is a philosophical one. Regular Show is making a quiet argument that small things matter, that the passions of ordinary people are as valid and as worthy of narrative attention as the passions of heroes and adventurers. And it makes that argument not through dialogue or monologue, but through the movies it chooses to reference. By placing Mordecai and Rigby's adventures in the same narrative tradition as Rocky Balboa and The Dude and Ash Williams, the show elevates them. It says, these characters are part of the same story. Their struggles are part of the same tradition. Their small victories and small defeats carry the same weight. That elevation is what makes Regular Show's borrowing feel generous rather than parasitic. The show is not stealing from these movies. It is honoring them. It is saying that these stories mattered, that they are worth remembering, that the feelings they produced in a kid watching VHS tapes in Hanford, California, were real and valid and important enough to build an entire television series around. And the movies are just one layer. Below them, beneath the action films and the horror films and the cult comedies, there is another layer of influence that is both more unexpected and more revealing. The anime layer. Regular Show's relationship with anime is different from its relationship with live-action films. With movies, the show tends to borrow structure and tone. With anime, it borrows energy. The way anime sequences move, the way they build toward climactic moments, the way they use visual excess to communicate emotional intensity. All of that shows up in Regular Show, particularly in its action sequences and its most visually ambitious episodes. The most direct anime reference in the series is the fictional show Planet Chasers: Starlight Excellent, which appears in an episode of the same name. Planet Chasers is a fictional anime tape that Rigby uses to distract Mordecai, and it is a loving, detailed parody of multiple anime genres simultaneously. The show within the show references Sailor Moon, Dragon Ball Z, Astro Boy, and several other touchstones of the magical girl and shonen action genres. Characters within Planet Chasers are designed to echo specific anime archetypes. Hori seems to be a parody of Tuxedo Mask and Sailor Venus. Naz's appearance greatly resembles that of a Saiyan from Dragon Ball Z. The art style shifts to match anime conventions, with larger eyes, more dynamic poses, and more elaborate transformation sequences. But Planet Chasers: Starlight Excellent is not just a parody. It is a meta-commentary on the relationship between Regular Show and its influences. In the episode, the fictional anime tape becomes so immersive that Mordecai and Rigby are pulled inside it. They literally enter the reference. They become part of the thing they are consuming. That is a perfect metaphor for what Regular Show does with all of its source material. It does not stand outside its influences and comment on them. It enters them. It inhabits them. It becomes them, temporarily, and then returns to its own reality, carrying their energy and their logic and their emotional vocabulary. The Dragon Ball Z influence is particularly visible in Regular Show's fight sequences. When conflicts in the show escalate to their most extreme, the animation style shifts. Characters power up, energy blasts appear. The backgrounds become abstract fields of color and light. These are Dragon Ball Z conventions, borrowed from one of the most visually distinctive action anime ever produced. Akira Toriyama's Dragon Ball franchise established a visual language for animated combat that has been imitated by hundreds of shows across multiple decades. Regular Show is one of them. But whereas most American animated shows use anime-style fight sequences ironically, as a joke about how over-the-top anime can be, Regular Show uses them sincerely. When Mordecai and Rigby power up, the show is not making fun of Goku. It is channeling Goku. It is borrowing Goku's energy and applying it to a fight about who gets to use the TV remote. The Death Punchies episode, which introduces the Death Kwon-do martial arts style, draws from multiple martial arts anime and films simultaneously. The concept of a deadly martial art that can be learned from stolen instruction pages echoes the scroll-based martial arts traditions of countless kung fu films and anime series. The visual design of the Death Kwon-do practitioners, with their mullets and cut-off jean shorts, is specifically American, but the combat itself, the idea that a single technique can be devastatingly powerful if performed correctly, comes directly from the martial arts anime tradition. Fist of the North Star in particular, with its concept of striking vital points to trigger explosive, catastrophic damage, resonates with the way Death Kwon-do techniques work in regular show. One move, devastating consequences. The simplicity is the point. The show's relationship with anime extends beyond specific references into a broader stylistic influence. Anime taught regular show how to do emotional weight through visual excess. In most Western animated comedies, emotional moments are handled through dialogue and voice performance. In anime, emotional moments are handled through the image. A character's face fills the screen. The background disappears. Time slows down. The visual language communicates the emotion before any words are spoken. Regular show adopts this technique regularly, particularly in its more dramatic moments. When something genuinely important happens to Mordecai or Rigby, the show often slows down, simplifies the frame, and lets the image do the emotional work. That is anime grammar, applied to an American cartoon, and it is one of the reasons regular show's emotional moments hit harder than they should. There is also an influence from anime's approach to serialization that shaped regular show's storytelling over its 8 seasons. Early anime, particularly the long-running shonen series that Quintel would have been exposed to, developed a model of storytelling where individual episodes function as self-contained adventures while simultaneously contributing to a larger, ongoing narrative. Each episode of Dragon Ball Z has its own conflict and resolution, but it also moves the characters forward on a longer journey. Regular show follows this model. Each episode tells a complete story, but across the series the characters grow, their relationships change, and the world they inhabit evolves. Mordecai's romantic life, Rigby's journey toward maturity, Benson's gradual softening, Pops's mysterious backstory, all of these long-form arcs develop incrementally, episode by episode, in a way that mirrors the serialization strategies of the anime regular show grew up watching. But perhaps the most surprising influence on regular show is one that has nothing to do with animation at all. It comes from a very specific corner of American pop culture that most people do not associate with a Cartoon Network show. It comes from the world of competitive gaming, documentary filmmaking, and the strange culture of obsessive achievement that surrounds arcade machines and high score boards. The King of Kong, A Fistful of Quarters, is a 2007 documentary directed by Seth Gordon. It follows Steve Wiebe, a middle school science teacher from Redmond, Washington, as he attempts to break Billy Mitchell's long-standing world record on the original Donkey Kong arcade game. Mitchell, who is portrayed in the film as arrogant, manipulative, and protected by a network of gaming insiders who refuse to acknowledge Wiebe's achievements, becomes the documentary's villain. The film is beloved because it takes something that should not matter, a video game high score, and makes it matter enormously. It finds genuine drama in a seemingly trivial competition. It shows that the emotions people invest in small achievements are as real and as complex as the emotions people invest in anything else. Regular show absorbed the King of Kong completely. Garrett Bobby Ferguson, the giant floating head who appears in High Score and returns in the Season 4 premiere Exit 9B, is a direct, unmistakable parody of Billy Mitchell. The character's physical appearance mirrors Mitchell's. His arrogance mirrors Mitchell's. His relationship with the gaming establishment mirrors Mitchell's. And the episode's emotional structure mirrors the King of Kong's. Mordecai and Rigby are the Steve Wiebes of this story. They are the underdogs. They are the nobodies who dare to challenge the champion. And the champion does not just want to beat them. He wants to humiliate them. He wants to prove that they do not belong in his world. The fact that Billy Mitchell later turned out to have actually cheated, that his records were stripped in 2018 after evidence of fraud emerged, adds an extraordinary layer to this homage. Regular show's writers could not have known, in 2011, that Mitchell's achievements would be discredited. But the instinct that led them to portray his analog as a villain, the sense that there was something false about his persona, turned out to be prophetically accurate. The show did not just reference a documentary. It saw through its subject. It recognized the fraud before anyone could prove it. And it did so not through investigative journalism or insider knowledge, but through the kind of narrative intuition that good storytelling cultivates. They looked at Billy Mitchell and thought, that is a villain. And they were right. Exit 9B, the Season 4 premiere, which aired on October 1, 2012, brings Garrett Bobby Ferguson back from the dead, along with dozens of other villains from previous episodes. His son, Garrett Bobby Ferguson Jr., orchestrates a plot to destroy everything Mordecai and Rigby care about as revenge for his father's defeat. The episode functions as a kind of greatest hits compilation of regular show's villainy, and in doing so, it becomes a greatest hits compilation of the show's pop culture references. Every villain who returns is a reference that was given life, a borrowed concept that became an original character, and seeing them all together in one episode is like seeing a museum exhibition of everything regular show took and transformed. The episode's climax, in which Skip summons allies from previous episodes to fight the assembled villains, contains a moment where Mordecai rallies the troops by saying, "Hold the line and now," a reference to Braveheart. The entire episode's structure, a climactic battle against overwhelming odds that requires the heroes to unite all their allies, is borrowed from countless action films and fantasy epics. Exit 9B is regular show at its most openly referential, its most shamelessly derivative, and paradoxically, its most original, because the specific combination of references, the way they interact and collide and produce something new in their collision, is unique to regular show. No other show would put a Billy Mitchell parody in the same episode as a Braveheart homage. No other show would stage a battle between arcade game villains and supernatural allies on the grounds of a public park. The originality is in the curation. The art is in the arrangement. Before we move on, if you are enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. There is another category of influence that regular show draws from extensively, and it is one that reveals something important about the show's creative process. Regular show does not just borrow from great art, it borrows from specific art, and sometimes that specificity leads it to places that most animated shows would never go. Video Game Wizards, Episode 19 of Season 3, is the show's homage to The Wizard, the 1989 film starring Fred Savage. The Wizard is a family adventure film about a boy who discovers his younger brother is a video game prodigy and takes him on a road trip to compete in a Nintendo tournament. The film is remembered primarily for two things: the debut of Super Mario Bros. 3 and the Power Glove scene, in which a rival player named Lucas straps on Nintendo's ill-fated motion control peripheral and declares, "I love the Power Glove, it is so bad." Regular show recreates both of these elements with remarkable fidelity. The episode features a video game tournament called the Game Inferno Tournament, which mirrors the Nintendo competition in The Wizard. The prize is a device called the Maximum Glove, which is a direct analog of the Power Glove. There is even a commercial for the Maximum Glove that parodies the Power Glove's real marketing, complete with the promise of revolutionary motion control that the device cannot actually deliver. The final opponents in the tournament are named Fred and Jimmy, references to Fred Savage and the character Jimmy in the film. And one of the opponents uses a line directly echoing Lucas's famous Power Glove declaration. This is not a reference that regular show's primary audience would catch. The Wizard came out in 1989. Regular show's core audience was born in the late 1990s and early 2000s. They had never seen The Wizard. They had never heard of the Power Glove. They had no context for any of these references. And that is precisely the point. Regular show does not reference things for the audience. It references things for itself. It references things because J.G. Quintel cared about them, because they were part of his emotional history, because the feelings they produced in him were the feelings he wanted to reproduce in his show. Whether or not the audience recognizes the reference is secondary. What matters is that the reference produces the right feeling, and Video Game Wizards produces the right feeling. The excitement of a competition, the magic of a device that promises to change everything, the discovery that the promise was a lie, but the experience was real. This is why regular show's references never feel like homework. They never feel like a test the audience has to pass. Other shows use references as inside jokes, moments of complicity between the creators and the most knowledgeable segment of their audience. Regular show uses references as building materials. The audience does not need to recognize them for the structure to stand. The references are the foundation, not the facade. And that is because Quintel does not reference things he finds amusing. He references things he loves. There is a difference. Amusement produces winks. Love produces buildings. The show's relationship with its influences is not static across its 8-season run. It evolves. In the early seasons, the references tend to be more localized, more episodic. A single episode will borrow from a single film or a single game. Over the Top is about arm wrestling and Over the Top. Skip Strikes is about bowling and The Big Lebowski. Weekend at Benson's is about an unconscious boss and Weekend at Bernie's. Each episode has its primary reference, and the episode's structure follows that reference's structure. But as the show progresses, the references become more layered, more integrated, more difficult to trace to a single source. By season 4 and beyond, episodes are drawing from multiple influences simultaneously, blending them in ways that produce something genuinely new. The Terror Tales of the Park specials, which began in season 3, exemplify this evolution. Each special contains 3 segments, and each segment draws from a different corner of the horror genre. One segment might reference a specific Twilight Zone episode, while another draws from Japanese horror, and a third echoes a Stephen King novel. The combination of references within a single special creates a density of illusion that rewards multiple viewings. There is always another layer. There is always another source. The show becomes richer the more you know, but it never becomes inaccessible to someone who knows nothing. The Terror Tales of the Park specials also represent regular show's most sophisticated engagement with the concept of borrowing itself. In these episodes, the characters are literally telling stories. They are performing the act of narrative borrowing in real time. Each character chooses a horror trope, a genre convention, a recognizable framework, and then fills it with their own fears and their own experiences. Muscle Man tells a story that reflects his specific anxieties. Rigby tells a story that reflects his. The framing device makes the act of borrowing visible and intentional. It says, "We are all made of the stories we have consumed. The stories we tell are composites of the stories we have heard, and there is nothing dishonest or diminishing about that. It is simply how narrative works." But the Terror Tales specials are only one expression of a much deeper relationship between regular show and the horror genre. And to understand that relationship fully, you have to look at an episode that does not get enough credit for how precisely it borrows from a very specific corner of horror cinema. Ello Governor is the first episode of Season 2. It aired on November 29, 2010. The plot is deceptively simple. Mordecai and Rigby watch an old British horror movie called Ello Governor about a haunted taxicab that stalks and kills anyone who rides in it. The movie is low budget, poorly acted, and objectively not very frightening. But Rigby becomes terrified. He cannot stop thinking about it. He sees the taxi everywhere. He has nightmares. The fictional horror film consumes his waking life with a paranoia that borders on pathological. The British taxi in the episode is a parody of Christine, the killer car from Stephen King's 1983 novel and John Carpenter's film adaptation of the same year. It also draws from The Car, a 1977 horror film about a mysterious vehicle that terrorizes a small town. But the episode is not really about the car. It is about the experience of being scared by a movie. It is about the way horror burrows into your brain and refuses to leave. And that meta layer, the idea that consuming a horror reference can change you, can rewire your perception of reality, is one of the most honest things regular show ever says about its own relationship with pop culture. Think about what Ello Governor is actually depicting. A character watches a piece of media. That piece of media enters his consciousness. It begins to shape how he sees the world. He cannot distinguish between the fiction and his reality. The horror movie is not just something he watched. It is something that happened to him. That is a description of influence. That is what it means to be shaped by the stories you consume. Rigby is not just scared of the taxi. He has been changed by the taxi. The reference has become part of him, altering his behavior, his perception, his emotional state. If that is not a metaphor for what J.G. Quintel did with every movie and show and game he consumed growing up, Nothing is. The episode also marks the beginning of regular show's specific fascination with horror as a format for emotional storytelling. In horror, the stakes are always personal. The threat is always directed at someone specific. The fear is always individualized. Regular show recognized that this made horror the perfect vehicle for character work. When you scare a character, you learn what they care about, what they are afraid of losing, who they turn to for help, how they cope with something they cannot control. Elo Governor tells you that Rigby is brave in the face of real danger, that he can fight monsters and face death himself, but he is undone by something as simple as a bad movie watched late at night. That is not weakness. That is specificity. That is the kind of detail that makes a character feel real. And the show continued to use horror this way throughout its entire run. Every Terror Tales of the Park special is an exercise in revealing character through fear. When Muscle Man tells a horror story, it is always about losing the people he loves, about being abandoned, about the things he tries to cover with bravado and my mom jokes. When Rigby tells a horror story, it is always about inadequacy, about being outmatched, about the gap between who he is and who he wants to be. When Benson tells a horror story, it is about control, about the terrifying possibility that no matter how hard he works, no matter how tightly he manages everything, chaos will win. The horror genre gave regular show a language for expressing these character truths that its normal comedy format could not accommodate. In a regular episode, Benson cannot admit that he is afraid of losing control. In a horror segment, he does not have to admit it. The story admits it for him. Before we move on, if you are enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. There is another dimension of regular show's borrowing that deserves its own section, because it reveals something about the show that most casual viewers never notice. Regular show does not just borrow from prestige culture. It borrows from trash culture, from B-movies and bad sequels and forgotten Saturday morning cartoons, and the kind of media that most people consume and discard without a second thought. And it treats that trash with exactly the same respect it gives to its more respectable influences. Meet Your Maker, Season 1, Episode 6, aired on October 11, 2010, is not based on any specific horror classic. It is based on the general tradition of low-budget horror comedies, where inanimate objects come to life and seek revenge. The concept of living hot dogs who want to punish people for eating their brethren is the kind of premise that belongs in a direct-to-video horror comedy from the mid-1980s. The kind of film that would have sat on the bottom shelf of a Blockbuster video, rented once on a dare and never thought about again. But regular show gives this B-movie premise A-level execution. The hot dogs are genuinely menacing. The walk-in freezer is genuinely claustrophobic. Tim Curry, one of the most iconic actors in horror and fantasy history, voices the lead hot dog. The show invests the same craft and care in this silly premise that it invests in its homages to Evil Dead and The Big Lebowski. That refusal to discriminate between high and low culture is itself a borrowed value. It comes from the 1980s. The decade that produced Bloodsport also produced Citizen Kane retrospectives on PBS. The decade that produced Friday the 13th Part Foy also produced Blue Velvet. The 1980s did not organize culture into hierarchies the way later decades would. A kid in Hanford, California, watching VHS tapes did not distinguish between art and entertainment, between prestige and trash, between films that would be remembered and films that would be forgotten. He consumed everything, and everything left a mark. Regular show inherits that omnivorous appetite. It does not curate its influences. It absorbs them all, and it trusts that the act of transformation, the process of turning borrowed material into something new, will elevate whatever it touches. This is why regular show can make an episode about haunted hot dogs and have it sit comfortably next to an episode that homages The Big Lebowski. Because in Quintel's creative universe, there is no hierarchy. There is only material. And all material is valid if you care about it enough, if you take it seriously enough, if you invest it with enough craft and attention and emotional honesty. That is a radical creative philosophy. Most shows are careful about what they reference because references function as signals to the audience about the show's taste and intelligence. Reference Kubrick and you signal sophistication. Reference Troma and you signal irony. Regular show references both, and it signals neither sophistication nor irony. It signals love. Indiscriminate, omnivorous, unashamed love for everything its creator ever watched. The caffeinated concert tickets episode exemplifies this approach in the musical realm. The fictional band Fist Pump is not a parody of a specific 80s band. It is a composite of every 80s arena rock band that ever existed. The name, the aesthetic, the music, the concept of a stadium show as the ultimate cultural event, all of it draws from a tradition that later decades would dismiss as cheesy and excessive. But regular show does not dismiss it. Mordecai and Rigby genuinely want to see Fist Pump. Their desire is not ironic. They are not going to the concert to make fun of it. They are going because the music matters to them. Because the experience of a live show, of standing in a crowd and feeling the bass in your chest, is one of the most powerful experiences a person can have. The episode aired on September 20th, 2010, and it established one of regular show's most important principles. There is no such thing as a guilty pleasure. There are only pleasures, and they all deserve to be taken seriously. This principle extends to the show's treatment of nostalgia itself. Regular show is deeply, unapologetically nostalgic. It is nostalgic for technologies that no longer exist, for cultural forms that have been superseded, for a way of experiencing entertainment that requires physical objects and physical presence. But its nostalgia is not the lazy, self-congratulatory nostalgia that treats the past as inherently superior to the present. Regular show's nostalgia is specific. It is nostalgic for the feeling of rewinding a VHS tape, for the sound of a cassette player clicking into place, for the weight of an arcade joystick under your hand, for the experience of watching a movie with a friend, and knowing that you are both seeing the same thing at the same time, in the same room, on the same screen. That specificity is what prevents the nostalgia from becoming shallow. Regular show does not say, the 80s were better. It says, there was something about the 80s that we lost, and here is exactly what it was. The thing that was lost is not the technology or the culture or the aesthetic. The thing that was lost is the intimacy, the shared physical experience. The fact that entertainment used to require you to be in the same place as other people. You had to go to the arcade together. You had to watch the VHS tape together. You had to listen to the cassette tape together. Digital culture made entertainment abundant and accessible, but also solitary and disposable. Regular show mourns the disposability, not the technology. This is why the show's pop culture references never feel like empty nostalgia bait. Every reference carries a subtext about shared experience. When Mordecai and Rigby fight over who gets to play the arcade game, they are not just referencing arcade culture. They are demonstrating what arcade culture made possible: conflict and connection, and competition and cooperation, all happening in real time, in the same physical space. The reference is not about the game. It is about the relationship that the game facilitates. And that is always, always, what regular show's borrowing is really about. The borrowed material is never the point. The relationship is the point. The friendship is the point. Every reference, every homage, every stolen plot structure and borrowed fight sequence exists to create a context in which Mordecai and Rigby's friendship can be tested and affirmed. There is something else regular show borrowed that deserves examination, something that is harder to pin to a single source, but is absolutely essential to understanding the show's appeal. Regular show borrowed the concept of escalation as a narrative structure. The pattern is always the same. Start small, a mundane task, a simple desire, an ordinary day at the park, and then, through a series of steps that each feel logical in the moment, but are collectively insane, the situation escalates until it reaches cosmic proportions. Setting up chairs for a party leads to fighting a destroyer of worlds. Trying to return a library book leads to a confrontation with a demonic librarian. Arguing about who ate the last slice of pizza leads to a rift in the space-time continuum. This escalation pattern did not originate with regular show. It is a staple of a specific tradition in animated comedy that stretches back through decades. The Simpsons used it. Beavis and Butthead used it. Ren and Stimpy used it. Even classic Looney Tunes cartoons used a version of it, where a simple conflict between two characters would escalate through increasingly extreme responses until both characters were standing in the ruins of the entire environment. But regular show refined the escalation pattern in a way that none of its predecessors did. In earlier shows, escalation was usually symmetrical. Character A does something extreme. Character B responds with something more extreme. Character A responds to that with something even more extreme. The escalation is driven by mutual stubbornness. In regular show, Escalation is asymmetrical. The characters do something small and harmless, and then the universe responds with something extreme. The characters are not driving the escalation. The world is. Mordecai and Rigby do not choose to fight a monster. The monster appears because they pressed a button on a keyboard, or rented the wrong videotape, or said the wrong words at the wrong time. The escalation comes from outside, from the supernatural infrastructure that seems to underlie every mundane activity in the park. This asymmetrical escalation produces a very specific emotional effect. It makes the characters feel like they are at the mercy of forces they cannot control or predict. And that feeling, the feeling of being small in a world that is much bigger and stranger and more dangerous than you realized, is one of the most resonant feelings in all of fiction. It is the feeling of childhood. The feeling of discovering that the world does not work the way you thought it did. The feeling of realizing that your actions have consequences that extend far beyond what you intended. Regular Show takes that feeling and deploys it in every single episode, and it works every single time because the feeling is universal. Everyone has experienced the moment when something small spiraled into something enormous. Everyone has felt the vertigo of losing control. The show's escalation pattern also serves a structural purpose that is directly related to its borrowing strategy. The escalation creates a bridge between the mundane and the fantastical that allows Regular Show to shift between genres within a single episode. An episode can start as a workplace comedy and end as a horror film. It can start as a buddy comedy and end as a science fiction epic. It can start as a romance and end as an action movie. The escalation provides a smooth narrative ramp between these genres, making the transitions feel organic rather than jarring. And each genre the episode passes through on its way to its climax brings its own set of references and homages. The workplace comedy section references sitcom conventions. The horror section references horror conventions. The action climax references action movie conventions. A single 11-minute episode can touch 5 or 6 different genres and 5 or 6 different sets of influences, and the escalation structure holds it all together. Before we move on, if you are enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. There is a character in Regular Show who embodies the show's borrowing philosophy more completely than any other. That character is Skips. Skips is the park's handyman, an immortal yeti who has been alive for centuries and has accumulated knowledge and experience that makes him the group's default problem solver. When something goes wrong, Skips usually knows what it is, why it happened, and how to fix it. He has seen everything before. He has fought every monster. He has read every book. He has learned every skill. He is, in essence, a walking encyclopedia of all the genres and tropes and narrative patterns that Regular Show draws from. But Skips's backstory, which the show reveals gradually over multiple seasons and culminates in Skips's story, a Season 5 episode that earned a 9.7 rating on IMDb, is itself a borrowed narrative. The story of a young man who loses the love of his life and agrees to become immortal to serve a cosmic purpose is one of the oldest stories in Western literature. It echoes the myth of Tithonus, who was granted immortality but not eternal youth. It echoes the legend of the wandering Jew, who is condemned to walk the earth until the second coming. It echoes the Highlander franchise, where immortals must fight each other across centuries while watching everyone they love grow old and die. In Skip's story, we learn that Skips was originally called Walks. He was a student at a high school where he met a girl named Desdemona. They fell in love. But Skips was also drawn into a cosmic conflict involving the Guardians of Eternal Youth and a villain named Clorgbane. During the battle with Clorgbane, Desdemona was killed, not directly by the villain's weapon, but by falling debris caused by the fight. She died because of a battle that was not hers. She died because the people around her were caught up in something too big for any of them. And in the aftermath of her death, the Guardians offered Walks immortality, so that he could fight Clorgbane every 157 years for the rest of eternity. They warned him that immortality would mean watching everyone he loved come and go. And Walks agreed, because he had already lost the one person he loved most. There was nothing left for mortality to offer him. That is not a Regular Show story. That is a Greek tragedy. That is the kind of narrative that has been told and retold for thousands of years, in every culture, in every language, in every medium. And Regular Show tells it in a cartoon about a yeti who works at a park. The show does not flinch from the weight of the borrowed narrative. It does not lighten it with humor or undercut it with irony. It plays the tragedy straight. Desdemona dies. Skips mourns. The loss is permanent and irreversible. And the show holds on that loss, lets you feel it, lets it sit in the silence between scenes. That is what sets regular show apart from every other animated show that borrows from pop culture. It is not afraid of the weight. When it borrows a comedy, it borrows the comedy's heart. When it borrows a tragedy, it borrows the tragedy's grief. It does not protect itself from the emotional consequences of its own references. It follows them wherever they lead, even when they lead to places that a children's cartoon is not supposed to go. Skips's immortality is not a superpower. It is a curse. It is the price he pays for a loss he can never undo. And the show treats it with the seriousness it deserves, because the stories that Skips's backstory borrows from, the myths and legends and franchise films about immortal warriors, all treat immortality as a burden rather than a gift. Regular show inherited that understanding, and it is one of the deepest things the show ever inherited from anything. The show's willingness to go dark extends to its treatment of other characters as well. Benson, the gumball machine who manages the park, is on the surface a comedic figure. He yells. He threatens to fire people. He turns red with anger. He is the demanding boss archetype, drawn from decades of workplace comedies. But beneath that surface, Benson is a character defined by loneliness and disappointment. His relationship history is a series of failures. His career as a musician was a dead end. His position at the park, which should represent stability and achievement, is a constant source of stress and humiliation. The show borrows the angry boss from sitcom tradition, but then asks the question that sitcoms never ask. Why is the boss angry? And the answer it provides is not funny. The answer is that the boss is angry because the boss is sad. Because the boss wanted more from life and did not get it. Because the boss watches his employees slack off and sees in their carelessness a reminder of everything he lost by taking responsibility. That character analysis is not explicitly stated in any episode. It is assembled from dozens of small moments across 8 seasons. A look on Benson's face when he is alone. A conversation with Audrey that goes nowhere. A flashback to his drumming days that ends with the audience empty and the venue dark. Regular show does character work the way a mosaic artist works, one small piece at a time, each piece insignificant on its own, but the accumulated whole forming a portrait that is startlingly detailed and emotionally rich. And this too is borrowed. This approach to character, this method of revealing inner life through accumulated behavioral detail rather than through exposition or monologue, comes from literary fiction. It is the technique that short story writers use, the technique that novelists use, the technique that prestige television dramas use. It is not supposed to appear in an 11-minute Cartoon Network comedy about anthropomorphic animals. But regular show does not care about what is supposed to appear where. It takes what it needs from wherever it finds it. Literary characterization technique? Into the show it goes. Greek tragic structure? Into the show it goes. Japanese animation grammar? Into the show it goes. The show has no respect for genre boundaries because the man who created it had no respect for genre boundaries. He consumed everything, and everything is in the show. Muscle Man is another example of this layered characterization. On the surface, he is the least refined character in the show. His humor is crude. His my mom jokes are repetitive and annoying. His behavior is boorish and immature. He is the kind of character that exists in every workplace comedy as the office clown, the person everyone tolerates but nobody takes seriously. That archetype is borrowed from sitcoms going back decades, from Norm Peterson in Cheers to Kevin Malone in The Office. But regular show layers something onto that archetype that its predecessors rarely did. Muscle Man loves deeply. His relationship with Starla, which begins in the episode Muscle Woman and culminates in their wedding during the season 6 finale, Dumped at the Altar, is one of the most emotionally authentic relationships in the entire show. Starla is not a conventionally attractive character. She is loud, aggressive, and physically imposing. She and Muscle Man are, by conventional standards, a joke. Two obnoxious, unappealing people who found each other. But the show never treats their love as a joke. It treats it as the real thing. Their arguments are real arguments. Their reconciliations are real reconciliations. Their wedding is a real wedding, not a parody of one. The show borrows the sitcom archetype of the obnoxious coworker, and then asks the same question it asks about Benson. Who is this person when nobody is watching? And the answer, again, is surprisingly tender. Muscle Man's bravado is a shield. His jokes are a defense mechanism. Underneath the mullet and the gut and the endless "my mom" references is a person who is terrified of being alone, terrified of being unlovable, terrified of losing the one person who sees past his performance to the vulnerable person underneath. That is not borrowed from sitcoms. That is borrowed from life. And the fact that regular show can find that kind of emotional truth inside a character who started as a walking fart joke is a testament to the depth of its creative process. The show does something similar with Pops, the character who began as the naive man from Lollyland and evolved into something far more complex and ultimately far more tragic. In the early seasons, Pops is comic relief. He is naive, out of touch, easily delighted by simple things. He exists in a world of his own, a world that is gentler and more whimsical than the one his coworkers inhabit. He is the innocent, the child man, the holy fool. That archetype is as old as storytelling itself. It appears in Shakespeare's Fools, in Dostoevsky's Prince Mishkin, in Forrest Gump and Being There, and every other story about a simple person who unknowingly reveals profound truths through their simplicity. But regular show takes Pops somewhere that none of those other stories go. In the final season, it is revealed that Pops is not just an innocent. He is a cosmic being. He is the embodiment of pure good, born on a planet called Lollyland, locked in an eternal cycle of conflict with his twin brother Antipops, the embodiment of pure evil. Every time they fight, the universe resets. They have been doing this forever. The battle at the end of regular show is not just the climax of a television series. It is the latest iteration of an eternal conflict between good and evil that has been happening since the beginning of existence. That is borrowed from everywhere. It is borrowed from Zoroastrianism, with its eternal struggle between Ahura Mazda and Angra Mainyu. It is borrowed from the Star Wars concept of the Force, with its light side and dark side locked in perpetual balance. It is borrowed from Norse mythology, where the gods know that Ragnarok is coming, and that the world will be destroyed and reborn in an endless cycle. It is borrowed from Hindu cosmology, where the universe is created and destroyed by the gods in cycles that span trillions of years. Regular show takes all of these borrowed cosmic structures and places them inside the body of a lollipop-headed man who says, "Jolly good show," and gets excited about butterscotch. The gap between Pops' surface personality and his cosmic significance is the largest gap in the entire show, and it is one of the most powerful. Because it says something that every one of those borrowed mythologies says in its own way. The most important things in the universe do not look important. They look ordinary. They look naive. They look like a sweet old man who works at a park and does not understand how the world works. And then, when the time comes, they fly into the sun to save everything. The series finale, a regular epic final battle, which aired on January 16, 2017, is the culmination of every borrowed influence the show ever absorbed. The cosmic battle between Pops and Anti-Pops draws from anime's tradition of world-ending confrontations. The emotional stakes draw from the character work that literary fiction taught the show how to do. The sacrifice draw from the mythological traditions that shape every culture's understanding of heroism and redemption. And the final montage, set to David Bowie's Heroes, draws from the tradition of using popular music to create emotional resonance in visual storytelling. Bowie died on January 10, 2016, almost exactly 1 year before the finale aired. The use of Heroes serves as both a tribute to Bowie and a statement about the show's relationship with the music that shaped it. Heroes is a song about two people who know their time together is temporary, who know that the world will not let them stay in this perfect moment, but who choose to inhabit it fully anyway. That is regular show's thesis, stated in someone else's words, set to someone else's melody, but carrying the show's own meaning. The characters know the show is ending. They know they have to grow up, move on, leave the park, and they choose to be present in the moment anyway. To be heroes, just for one day. The epilogue flashes forward 25 years. We see what happens to everyone. Mordecai becomes an artist. Rigby starts a family. Benson finds peace. The park endures. And Pops watches all of it from somewhere beyond, on a VHS tape labeled Regular Show. He ejects the tape and says, "Jolly good show." The last line of the series is spoken by its oldest character, the one who was there before the show began, the one who was born in a CalArts student film in 2005 and carried forward through 244 episodes of television. The last line is borrowed from British comedy tradition, from the vocabulary of a very specific kind of polite, understated approval. And it is perfect. Because Regular Show has always been a jolly good show. It has always been exactly what it set out to be. A show made of other shows, held together by the specific love of a specific person, carrying the emotional fingerprints of every story J.G. Quintel ever consumed. The VHS tape detail in the finale is the key to understanding everything. Pops is watching the show on a VHS tape. Not streaming it, not watching it on a phone, on a VHS tape. The medium that defined Quintel's childhood. The medium that required physical presence, physical interaction, physical care. You had to rewind the tape. You had to handle the tape. You had to store the tape somewhere safe. The show's final image is not just nostalgic. It is a statement of values. Regular Show believes in the tactile, the physical, the present. It believes that the way you experience a story matters as much as the story itself. And it believes that the best way to experience a story is with your hands, in a room, with the lights off, close to the people you love. Before we move on, if you are enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. There is one more borrowed influence that needs to be examined, because it is the one that most clearly shaped the show's approach to its own final season. Season 8, subtitled Regular Show in Space, sends the entire cast into outer space after the events of Rigby's Graduation Day special, the Season 7 finale that aired on June 30th, 2016. The final season is a continuous arc, a departure from the episodic structure that defined the show's first 7 years, and its influences are drawn from the grand tradition of space opera. The show borrows the visual language of Star Wars, vast star fields, sleek spacecraft, laser battles, and the iconography of good versus evil rendered in cosmic scale. It borrows the ensemble dynamics of Star Trek, a crew of diverse personalities confined to a vessel, each contributing their specific skills to the survival of the group. It borrows the existential weight of 2001, A Space Odyssey, the loneliness of space, the smallness of human concerns against the backdrop of infinity, the way the cosmos reduces everything to its essential components. But the space setting serves a deeper purpose than spectacle. It strips the characters of their context. Throughout 7 seasons, the park was the stage on which every relationship played out. The park was home. It was the place where Mordecai and Rigby ate snacks, played video games, avoided work, fell in love, made mistakes, and grew up. Removing the park and placing the characters in space forces them to confront what remains when the familiar is taken away. And what remains is each other. The relationships, the friendships, the connections that were built over 7 years of shared experience. This is borrowed from every story about exile and displacement that has ever been told. The Odyssey is about a man trying to get home. The Bible is about a people wandering in the wilderness. Lost is about strangers stranded together in an alien environment. Regular Show's final season borrows from all of these, but it uses the borrowed structure to answer a question that is specific to this show. What happens when slackers run out of things to slack off from? What happens when Mordecai and Rigby can no longer avoid work, can no longer sit on the couch, can no longer retreat into their routines? The answer is that they step up. Not because they want to, because they have to. Because the people they care about need them to. And that transformation, from slackers to heroes, from boys to men, could only happen outside the park. It could only happen in space, in a borrowed setting that forces the characters to become the best versions of themselves. The Brilliant Century Duck Crisis Special, which aired on April 9, 2015, in Season 6, represents Regular Show's most direct and comprehensive engagement with anime as a genre, rather than as a set of visual references. The episode features the baby ducks and the park gang transforming into giant robots to fight in an intergalactic conflict over merchandising rights. The episode's opening sequence is a shot-for-shot parody of the opening of Zeta Gundam, one of the landmark mecha anime series. The title Brilliant Century is a reference to the Gundam metaverse's use of different centuries or timelines to organize its sprawling narrative. The climactic fusion scene, where the characters combine to form Hyperduck Kingbreaker White Lightning, directly references Tengen Toppa Gurren Lagann, the 2007 anime that is itself an homage to every super robot show that preceded it. What is remarkable about Brilliant Century Duck Crisis Special is that it does not merely reference these anime, it becomes one. For 30 minutes, Regular Show stops being a Cartoon Network comedy and becomes a mecha anime. The character dynamics shift to match anime conventions. The stakes escalate according to anime logic. The emotional beats follow anime rhythms, and the visual style transforms entirely, adopting the dynamic camera angles, the exaggerated motion lines, the shimmering energy fields, and the sense of cosmic scale that define the mecha genre. This is the furthest Regular Show ever travels from its own identity in pursuit of a borrowed influence. And it works because the show has spent years earning the audience's trust. By season 6, the audience knows that Regular Show can be anything. It has been a horror show, a buddy comedy, a romance, a workplace sitcom, a fantasy epic, and an arcade game. Becoming a mecha anime is just one more transformation in a series built on transformation. The audience follows because they know that wherever the show goes, it will bring its characters and its emotional core with it. The mecha battles matter not because giant robots are cool, although they are, but because the baby ducks matter, because the park matters, because the relationships matter. The anime is the frame, the friendship is the painting. This brings us to what may be the most ambitious act of borrowing in Regular Show's entire run. Regular Show, the movie. The film premiered on November 25, 2015, on Cartoon Network. It runs for 69 minutes, and its plot is frankly a love letter to the entire tradition of time travel storytelling in American cinema. The film follows Mordecai and Rigby as they discover that a time machine they built in high school has created a time-nado, a tornado capable of traveling through space and time. Their former science teacher and volleyball coach, Mr. Ross, has weaponized this temporal anomaly and now threatens the entire universe. The gang must travel through the timeline to stop him. The film's references are not subtle. The time travel mechanics draw heavily from Back to the Future, the 1985 Robert Zemeckis film that established the grammar of time travel storytelling for an entire generation. The idea of going back to high school, of seeing your younger self, of having to navigate the past without disrupting the future. All of this is Back to the Future's DNA. Even Mr. Ross's character echoes the franchise's structure. A teacher who becomes a villain mirrors the Biff Tannen arc of Back to the Future Part 2, where a seemingly harmless antagonist gains power through temporal manipulation. But the film also draws from Star Wars, with its galaxy-spanning conflict and its emphasis on the bonds between friends as the key to defeating cosmic evil. The visual language of the climactic battle, the scale of the threat, the way the characters rally together for a final stand, all of it echoes the original Star Wars trilogy's approach to climactic storytelling. And beneath those two primary influences, there are echoes of The Terminator, of Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, of every time travel story that uses the past and the future as mirrors for the characters' present-day emotional states. Regular Show, the movie, is not a great film. It is not even the best Regular Show has to offer, but it is the most revealing document of the show's creative process. In 69 minutes, it lays bare everything Regular Show has been doing for its entire run. It takes multiple borrowed frameworks, time travel from Back to the Future, space opera from Star Wars, high school nostalgia from every coming-of-age film ever made, and smashes them together until something new emerges from the collision. The newness is not in any individual element. It is in the combination. It is in the specific way Regular Show arranges its influences, the specific emotional frequencies it amplifies, the specific tensions it resolves or leaves deliberately unresolved. And at the center of all that borrowing, at the center of the film and of the series as a whole, is the friendship between Mordecai and Rigby. That friendship is the one thing Regular Show did not copy from anywhere. It is the one thing that is entirely, authentically, originally theirs. Mordecai and Rigby's dynamic was born in a CalArts dorm room, refined in student films, and developed over 244 episodes of television. It does not come from the Mighty Boosh, or Beavis and Butthead, or Toe Jam and Earl. It comes from Quintel and Marin sitting next to each other in animation class, making each other laugh, pushing each other to be better, driving each other crazy. The friendship is real. Everything else is borrowed, and the borrowed material exists to serve the friendship, to give it contexts and challenges and adventures, to test it and strengthen it and ultimately affirm it. But the movie is not the end of the story. It is not even the climax, because after the movie, after the film proved that regular show could sustain its borrowing strategy at feature length, the show returned to television and did something that none of its influences had prepared it for. It grew up. The later seasons of regular show, particularly seasons 5 through 7, mark a shift in the show's relationship with its source material. The references do not disappear. They become quieter, more integrated, less likely to drive entire episodes, and more likely to appear as textures within episodes that are primarily about character development. The show begins to prioritize its original elements over its borrowed ones. And the original elements, the relationships, the growth, the slow accumulation of emotional weight, turn out to be the strongest parts of the show. Stake Me Amadeus, the Season 4 finale, which aired on August 12, 2013, is the turning point. The episode's title is a reference to Rock Me Amadeus, the 1985 hit by Austrian musician Falco. The episode features agents who resemble Mulder and Scully from The X-Files. The 96-ounce steak challenge is a nod to the old 96er from the 1988 comedy The Great Outdoors. These references are present, but they are wallpaper. They are not what the episode is about. The episode is about Mordecai asking Margaret to be his girlfriend, and Margaret saying no. That is the moment regular show stops being a show about pop culture and starts being a show about people. The rejection is not played for laughs. It is not undercut by a supernatural escalation. There is no monster that appears and forces the characters to set aside their emotional conflict in favor of physical survival. The emotional conflict is the episode. Mordecai asks. Margaret answers. And the answer hurts. The borrowed references in Stake Me Amadeus serve a new function. They are not the skeleton of the episode. They are the set dressing. The X-Files agents and the Falco reference and the Great Outdoors nod create an atmosphere of heightened absurdity that makes the emotional gut punch at the end even more effective. You are watching a silly episode about steak and secret agents, and then, without warning, you are watching a young man get his heart broken. The contrast between the lightness of the references and the weight of the emotional moment is devastating, and it is a trick that regular show learned from the very movies it borrows from. The best 80s movies do the same thing. They lull you with spectacle and comedy, and then, when your guard is down, they hit you with something real. Mordecai's romantic arc, which spans most of the series, is one of the areas where regular show's borrowing is most complex and most revealing. The love triangle between Mordecai, Margaret, and CJ draws from the tradition of romantic comedies, from When Harry Met Sally, to The Graduate, to every teen movie that ever depicted a young man choosing between two women who represent different possibilities for his future. Margaret is the dream. She is the idealized version of love, the one Mordecai has wanted since the beginning. CJ is the reality. She is the actual relationship, the one that requires work and compromise and the willingness to be imperfect. The show borrows this triangle from romantic comedy tradition, but refuses to resolve it the way romantic comedies resolve it. In a romantic comedy, the protagonist chooses. He picks the right girl. The music swells. The credits roll. Regular show denies its audience that satisfaction. Mordecai does not choose. He waffles. He makes mistakes. He hurts both women. He hurts himself. And eventually, in the series finale's flash forward, we learn that Mordecai does not end up with either Margaret or CJ. He meets someone new, someone the audience has never seen, someone who exists outside the borrowed framework of the love triangle entirely. That is one of the bravest creative decisions the show ever made. It took a borrowed narrative structure, the love triangle, and refused to honor its conventions. It said, "Real life does not work like romantic comedies. Real life does not give you a choice between two clearly defined options. Real life gives you uncertainty and regret, and the slow realization that the person you end up with might be someone you have not met yet." By refusing to resolve the love triangle within the show's timeline, regular show transcends its borrowed framework. It uses the romantic comedy structure long enough to explore what romantic confusion actually feels like, and then it abandons the structure in favor of something messier and more honest. This is the evolution of regular shows borrowing in its purest form. The early seasons borrow structures and follow them to their conclusions. The later seasons borrow structures and then break them. The show learns from its influences and then outgrows them. It uses borrowed scaffolding to build something, and then it removes the scaffolding, and the building stands on its own. Before we move on, if you are enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. There is a parallel evolution happening with Rigby during the later seasons that reveals another dimension of the show's relationship with its influences. In the early seasons, Rigby is the pure embodiment of the slacker archetype. He does not work. He does not try. He does not care. He is Beavis without the edge, Butthead without the malice, a character defined entirely by his refusal to engage with anything that requires effort. That archetype is borrowed from decades of comedy, from Animal House to Wayne's World to every media property that has ever celebrated the beauty of doing absolutely nothing. But Regular Show does something that none of those earlier slacker comedies did. It lets the slacker grow up, slowly, painfully, reluctantly, but genuinely. Rigby's Graduation Day Special, the Season 7 finale that aired on June 30th, 2016, is the culmination of this growth. Rigby, who dropped out of high school and spent most of the series avoiding any form of self-improvement, goes back to school. He earns his diploma. He stands at a podium and delivers a speech to a crowd of graduates. And his speech is not eloquent or inspirational in the traditional sense. He says essentially that once you do the hard stuff, it becomes not that hard. Think about what that means in the context of a show built on borrowed slacker comedy DNA. The slacker archetype exists because it represents a fantasy. The fantasy of escaping responsibility, of living outside the system, of refusing to play a game that seems rigged against you. Every slacker comedy from Animal House forward has celebrated that fantasy. The slacker is cool because the slacker is free. The slacker does not answer to anyone. Regular Show celebrates that fantasy for 7 seasons. And then, in the finale of the 7th season, it gently, lovingly, honestly admits that the fantasy has an expiration date. Rigby cannot be a slacker forever, not because the world will not let him, but because he does not want to be anymore. He has seen enough. He has grown enough. He has been changed by his experiences, by his friendships, by the accumulated weight of 200 episodes of adventure and consequence, and the slow realization that avoiding the hard stuff does not make you free. It makes you stuck. That is not borrowed from any slacker comedy. That is the show's original contribution to the genre it inherited. Regular Show took the slacker archetype, the archetype it borrowed from Beavis and Butthead and Wayne's World, and every lazy afternoon Quintel spent in Hanford avoiding his chores, and it completed the arc that those earlier works never completed. It showed what happens after the slacking. It showed the moment when doing nothing stops being fun and starts being frightening. And it showed that the way out of that fear is not a grand gesture or a sudden transformation, but a simple, quiet decision to try, to do the hard stuff, to discover that it is not that hard. The show earned the right to make that statement because it spent 7 years not making it. It spent 7 years letting Rigby be Rigby, letting him fail, letting him coast, letting him avoid every opportunity for growth that the show offered him. The patience of the characterization is what gives the payoff its power. If Rigby had graduated in Season 2, it would have felt forced. In Season 7, it feels inevitable. The show trusted its own timeline. It trusted that the character would get there when he was ready. And it trusted that the audience, having watched Rigby's journey from the beginning, would feel the weight of the moment when it finally arrived. This patience is itself a borrowed quality, taken not from movies or games, but from long-form television storytelling. Shows like The Wire and Breaking Bad and Mad Men demonstrated that character transformation gains power from duration. The longer you watch a character, the more invested you become in their growth, and the more devastating or gratifying their eventual change feels. Regular Show applied this principle to a character who should not, by the conventions of animated comedy, be capable of change at all. Cartoon characters are not supposed to grow up. They are supposed to remain static, preserved in amber, ready to be reinserted into the same situations week after week. Regular Show said, what if they did grow up? What if the cartoon character could change? What if the slacker could graduate? The answer is one of the most emotionally satisfying moments in the history of animated television. And it could not have happened without the show's willingness to borrow from prestige drama's approach to character development and apply it to a Cartoon Network comedy. Once again, the show takes what it needs from wherever it finds it, regardless of genre or medium or audience expectations. Once again, the borrowed technique produces something original. There is another dimension of regular shows copying that operates on a level most viewers never consciously register. It is the way the show borrows structures from mythology and fairy tales. The park itself functions as a mythological space. It is a bounded world, separate from the outside, governed by its own rules. Characters enter the park and are transformed. They gain powers they did not have before. They encounter beings that do not exist in the normal world. They face tests and trials that seem disproportionate to their everyday concerns. The park is not just a workplace. It is a liminal space, a threshold between the mundane and the magical, the kind of space that appears in every mythology, from every culture in human history. The enchanted forest, the underworld, the island of the lotus eaters, the fairy ring, the wardrobe that leads to Narnia. These are all versions of the same mythological structure, a place that exists between worlds, where the normal rules do not apply, where transformation is possible but dangerous. The park in regular show is that kind of place. It looks like a municipal park in a mid-sized American city, but beneath its surface, it contains pocket dimensions, portals to other realms, imprisoned demons, buried artifacts, and the infrastructure of an eternal cosmic conflict between good and evil. This mythological reading of the park explains one of the show's most persistent and most perplexing features: the escalation. Why does every mundane activity in the park lead to supernatural catastrophe? Because the park is a mythological space. It is charged with supernatural energy. It is a place where the boundary between the ordinary and the extraordinary is thin. Any action, no matter how small, can puncture that boundary and let something through. Mordecai and Rigby do not create the chaos. The park creates the chaos. They are just the ones who happen to be standing at the puncture point when the boundary breaks. This reading borrows from the tradition of literary criticism that examines popular narratives through the lens of mythology. Joseph Campbell's concept of the monomyth, the hero's journey, is the most famous version of this approach. Campbell argued that all stories, across all cultures, share a common structure. The hero leaves the ordinary world, enters a special world, faces trials, undergoes transformation, and returns home changed. Regular show follows this structure in almost every episode. Mordecai and Rigby start in the ordinary world of the park. Something pulls them into the special world of the supernatural crisis. They face trials. They are changed, however slightly, by the experience. And they return to the park, to the couch, to the routine, carrying something they did not have before. The fact that regular show repeats this structure 244 times without it ever feeling repetitive is a testament to the power of the mythological framework it borrows from. The monomyth is not a formula. It is a rhythm. It is the rhythm of human experience, the rhythm of going out and coming back, of leaving home and returning home, of being transformed by the world and then integrating that transformation into your daily life. Regular show taps into that rhythm, and the rhythm is what makes the show feel not just entertaining, but necessary. Not just funny, but true. There is something else the show borrows from mythology that is worth naming: the concept of the trickster. In mythology, the trickster is a figure who disrupts the established order, who breaks rules, who creates chaos, who forces the world to reveal its hidden structures by refusing to respect its surface ones. Anansi, Coyote, Loki, Hermes. These are all tricksters. They are agents of change, not because they intend to change things, but because their nature is disruptive. They cannot help but upset the balance. Rigby is a trickster, not in the self-conscious, clever way that trickster characters are sometimes portrayed in modern media. Rigby is not a schemer. He is not strategic. He is a trickster in the original mythological sense, a being whose essential nature is to create disruption. He does not plan to unleash monsters, or break reality, or summon demons. He just does things, small things, impulsive things, and the universe responds with catastrophe. The trickster does not create the chaos intentionally. The trickster's presence creates the conditions under which chaos becomes inevitable. This is why Rigby is essential to the show in a way that goes beyond comedy. Without Rigby, nothing would happen. Mordecai is responsible enough to follow orders, to set up the chairs, to complete the task. Without Rigby pushing him to slack off, to take shortcuts, to pursue small pleasures instead of doing what he is supposed to do, the show would be about a competent employee having a normal day at work. Rigby's trickster energy is what activates the park's mythological potential. His impulsiveness is the key that unlocks the door between the mundane and the magical. Without the trickster, the enchanted forest is just a forest. Without Rigby, the park is just a park. And Mordecai, in this reading, is the hero. Not a grand hero, not a chosen one or a warrior or a savior. A reluctant hero. A hero who would rather sit on the couch but keeps getting pulled into adventures by the trickster at his side. That dynamic, the hero and the trickster, is one of the oldest in storytelling. Gilgamesh and Enkidu, Don Quixote and Sancho Panza, Holmes and Watson, Kirk and Spock, Han Solo and Chewbacca. In every case, the hero provides the moral center, while the trickster provides the narrative energy. The hero says, "We should do the right thing." The trickster says, "But would it not be more fun to do the wrong thing?" And the tension between those two impulses generates every story worth telling. Regular Show borrowed that dynamic from the deepest wells of storytelling tradition, and it deployed it with a consistency and an emotional intelligence that rivals any of its mythological predecessors. Mordecai and Rigby are the hero and the trickster, playing out the oldest story in the world in a park in a town that looks like Hanford, California, surrounded by characters who carry their own mythological archetypes. Skips is the wise old man, Benson is the authority figure, Pops is the divine fool, Muscle Man is the comedic companion, High Five Ghost is the loyal sidekick. Each of them slots into a role that has existed in stories for thousands of years, and each of them, through the show's patient, detailed characterization, transcends that role to become something individual and specific and real. Before we move on, if you are enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. There is one final borrowed structure that needs to be discussed, because it is the one that holds everything else together. Regular Show borrowed the concept of the ensemble. An ensemble is not just a group of characters who appear in the same show. An ensemble is a group of characters who need each other, whose individual stories are incomplete without the context provided by the other members of the group, whose relationships with each other generate more narrative possibilities than any individual character could generate alone. The ensemble is a technology of storytelling, a way of multiplying the emotional and narrative potential of a cast by making the connections between characters as important as the characters themselves. Regular Show's ensemble borrows from multiple traditions simultaneously. From the workplace comedy tradition, it takes the idea of characters who are thrown together by circumstance rather than choice and must find ways to coexist. From the adventure ensemble tradition, it takes the idea of characters with complementary skills who must work together to overcome challenges. From the family ensemble tradition, it takes the idea of characters who argue and fight and drive each other crazy, but would do anything to protect each other. The park crew is all of these things at once. They are co-workers, they are adventurers, they are a family, and the show slides between these modes fluidly, sometimes within a single episode. In one scene, Benson is the boss, and Mordecai is the employee, and their relationship is governed by workplace comedy dynamics. In the next scene, a monster appears, and Benson and Mordecai are comrades fighting side by side, and their relationship is governed by adventure dynamics. In the scene after that, the danger passes, and Benson puts his hand on Mordecai's shoulder, and they are father and son, and their relationship is governed by family dynamics. The transitions between these modes are seamless because the characters are deep enough to support all of them. That depth is the result of 8 seasons of accumulated detail. No single episode creates the depth. The depth emerges from the accumulation, from 244 episodes of small moments, a glance, a pause, a joke that is also a confession, a fight that is also a declaration of love. Regular Show builds its characters the way a coral reef builds itself, one tiny organism at a time, each one insignificant on its own, but the accumulated whole forming something massive and intricate and alive. And that accumulation is itself a borrowed technique. It is borrowed from the serialized television tradition, from shows that use their extended runtimes to build portraits of human complexity that a 2-hour film could never achieve. Regular show has 244 episodes. That is roughly 44 hours of content. 44 hours to build 6 or 7 fully realized characters and the web of relationships that connects them. No movie has that kind of time. No short story has that kind of space. Only long-form television offers the room for the kind of patient, gradual, almost geological character development that regular show practices. The fact that regular show uses that room so well, that it transforms a show about slackers and supernatural chaos into a genuinely moving portrait of friendship and growth and the passage of time, is its greatest achievement. And it is an achievement that would be impossible without the borrowing. Without the 80s movies that provided the show's emotional vocabulary, without the anime that provided its visual grammar, without the video games that provided its escalation logic, without the British comedies that provided its tonal flexibility, without the mythological structures that provided its narrative architecture, without the romantic comedies and prestige dramas and workplace sitcoms and horror films and cult documentaries and student films and VHS tapes and Sega Genesis cartridges that, together, formed the raw material from which J.G. Quintel built his show. And yet, even after cataloging all of these influences, there are layers of borrowing that we have not yet touched. Because regular show does not just borrow from other shows and movies. It borrows from the traditions of storytelling itself, from the ways that human beings have always organized their experiences into narratives. Consider the show's relationship with the concept of the quest. In its simplest form, a quest is a story about someone who needs something and goes to get it. The object of the quest can be anything: a holy grail, a golden fleece, a ring of power, a pair of concert tickets. What matters is not the object but the journey, the obstacles encountered along the way, the allies gained, the enemies defeated, the transformation that occurs between the departure and the return. Regular show runs on quest structure. Almost every episode is a quest. Mordecai and Rigby need something. They go to get it. Things go wrong. They overcome the obstacles. They either get the thing or they do not, but they are changed by the attempt. The simplicity of this structure is what makes it so versatile. You can fill it with any content. A quest for concert tickets is structurally identical to a quest for the Holy Grail. The emotions are the same. The narrative beats are the same. The satisfaction of completion is the same. By borrowing the quest structure and applying it to the most mundane possible objectives, regular show makes an argument about the nature of desire itself. It says, your quest matters. Whatever you are pursuing, however small it seems, the pursuit is meaningful. The obstacles are real. The growth is real. The journey is real. This is borrowed from the earliest stories ever told, from the Epic of Gilgamesh, from Homer's Odyssey, from the Arthurian legends, from every fairy tale that begins with once upon a time and ends with the hero returning home carrying something they did not have when they left. Regular show is telling these stories. It is telling them in a park with a blue jay and a raccoon, but it is telling them. And the fact that the structure is ancient is what makes it work. The audience does not consciously think, this is the hero's journey, but they feel it. They feel the satisfaction of the departure and the return. They feel the weight of the obstacles. They feel the rightness of the resolution. Because these structures are not cultural inventions. They are human invariants. They are the way our brains organize experience into meaning. The show also borrows from the tradition of the tall tale. A tall tale is a story that starts with something believable and then exaggerates it beyond all reason. Paul Bunyan was a logger, but he was a logger so strong he could reshape the landscape with a single swing of his axe. Pecos Bill was a cowboy, but he was a cowboy who could lasso a tornado. The tall tale takes a mundane occupation and inflates it to mythic proportions. It says, the ordinary is extraordinary if you look at it the right way. Regular show is a tall tale about park groundskeepers. Mordecai and Rigby are groundskeepers, but they are groundskeepers who encounter gods, fight demons, travel through time, and save the universe. The tall tale tradition gives the show permission to make its characters simultaneously ordinary and extraordinary. They mow lawns and fight monsters. They set up chairs and save reality. The two activities coexist because the tall tale form says they can. Because in the American tall tale tradition, the lumberjack and the demigod are the same person. This is a distinctly American form of storytelling, and it connects regular show to a tradition that predates television, predates cinema, predates even the written word. Tall tales were told around campfires, and on riverboats, and in logging camps. They were the entertainment of working people, stories designed to make labor feel heroic and boredom feel adventurous. Regular show does exactly the same thing. It makes park groundskeeping feel heroic. It makes the boredom of a dead-end job feel like the launching pad for epic adventure. And it does this not through irony or satire, but through the same sincere exaggeration that has characterized American tall tales since the founding of the Republic. Before we move on, if you are enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. There is also the question of what Regular Show borrowed from its own network. Cartoon Network in the late 2000s and early 2010s was experiencing a creative renaissance that produced some of the most innovative animated shows in the history of the medium. Adventure Time, which premiered in April 2010, 5 months before Regular Show, pioneered the combination of surreal comedy and genuine emotional depth that would define the era. The Amazing World of Gumball pushed the boundaries of visual experimentation. Steven Universe explored themes of identity and empathy with unprecedented frankness. These shows were not just Regular Show's contemporaries. They were its neighbors. They shared a network, an audience, and in some cases, creative personnel. Regular Show borrowed from this environment as much as it contributed to it. The network's willingness to let its shows go dark, to tackle emotional subjects, to trust young audiences with complex themes, created the conditions under which Regular Show could exist. A show that features a character dying in an arm wrestling match. A show that spends an entire episode on a romantic rejection. A show that ends with a character flying into the sun to save the universe. Could only exist at a network that had decided to treat animation as a serious art form rather than a babysitting tool. But Regular Show's relationship with its Cartoon Network siblings is also one of differentiation. Adventure Time's surrealism is expansive and mythological. Regular Show's surrealism is compact and sudden. Adventure Time builds a world. Regular Show disrupts one. Adventure Time's emotional moments are surrounded by context and backstory. Regular Show's emotional moments arrive without warning, embedded in episodes that seemed, until that moment, to be about nothing important. The shows are complementary, not competitive. They occupy different positions on the same spectrum, and together, they defined what Cartoon Network could be in the 2010s. The influence also flowed in the other direction. Joe Murray's shows, Rocko's Modern Life and Camp Lazlo, were direct predecessors to Regular Show. Quintel has credited Murray's stylistic elements as working their way into his own style. He did not just watch these shows, he worked on them. Quintel served as a crew member on Camp Lazlo and as creative director on The Marvelous Misadventures of Flapjack, while still completing his degree. These were not distant influences, they were apprenticeships. Quintel learned how animated television was made by making it, by sitting in rooms with experienced creators, by watching how stories were broken and storyboards were composed and voice acting was directed. Rocko's Modern Life, which premiered on Nickelodeon in 1993, is a particularly important predecessor. The show follows an anthropomorphic wallaby, navigating the absurdities of modern American life. The humor is surreal, the situations are bizarre, and the characters are animals who behave like humans in a world that seems designed to frustrate and confound them. The structural similarity to Regular Show is obvious. Both shows use anthropomorphic characters. Both shows find humor in the gap between mundane activities and surreal outcomes. Both shows treat everyday frustrations, going to the supermarket, paying bills, dealing with annoying neighbors, as the raw material for stories that spiral into the fantastical. But the deeper borrowing from Rocko's Modern Life is tonal. Murray's show was one of the first animated comedies to operate in the gap between children's entertainment and adult humor. The jokes in Rocko's Modern Life work on two levels. Children laugh at the slapstick and the absurdity. Adults laugh at the social satire and the innuendo. The show does not choose between these two audiences. It serves both simultaneously. Regular Show inherited this dual audience strategy and refined it. The 80s movie references work for adults who grew up watching those movies. The comedy works for kids who have never seen any of them. The show does not condescend to either audience. It trusts both of them to find what they need. Flapjack, the show Quintel worked on before creating Regular Show, contributed something different. The Marvelous Misadventures of Flapjack has a visual style that is, by any standard, strange. Characters are drawn with exaggerated proportions and unsettling expressions. The backgrounds are detailed and atmospheric. The overall aesthetic sits somewhere between whimsical and nightmarish. Regular Show did not adopt Flapjack's visual style, but it adopted its willingness to be unsettling. The ease with which Regular Show shifts from comedy to genuine creepiness, the way a sunny scene at the park can suddenly become dark and threatening, owes something to the time Quintel spent working on a show that treated the boundary between cute and disturbing as a suggestion rather than a rule. The lineage is clear. Murray's shows taught Quintel how to use anthropomorphic characters in surreal situations. Flapjack taught him how to find the darkness beneath whimsy. The Mighty Boosh taught him how to make darkness funny. Beavis and Butthead taught him how to make inaction compelling. The Simpsons taught him how to structure anthology episodes. And the 80s movies taught him how to make small stakes feel enormous. Each influence contributed a specific skill, a specific technique, a specific way of seeing and making that became part of Quintel's creative vocabulary. Regular Show is the product of that vocabulary. It is what happens when a person absorbs enough different influences that they begin to combine in unexpected ways, producing patterns and connections that none of the individual influences could have generated on their own. There is a word for this kind of creative process. The word is synthesis. Synthesis is not copying. It is not imitation. It is not pastiche. Synthesis is the act of combining disparate elements into something new, something that could not have existed without any of its components but is not reducible to any of them. A synthesizer, the musical instrument, takes different waveforms and combines them into sounds that no acoustic instrument could produce. Regular Show is a narrative synthesizer. It takes waveforms from the Mighty Boosh and Toe Jam and Earl and Evil Dead 2 and Dragon Ball Z and The Big Lebowski and a dozen other sources, and it combines them into a sound that is entirely its own. And like a synthesizer, the combinations are what make it unique. Any show could reference Evil Dead 2. Any show could borrow from The Big Lebowski, but no other show would put those two references in the same episode, or in adjacent episodes, or in the same season, and have them feel like they belong together. The uniqueness of Regular Show is not in its individual influences. It is in the specific combination of influences that only J.G. Quintel could have produced. Because only J.G. Quintel had that specific childhood. Only he watched that specific set of movies in that specific order in that specific town. Only he had that specific British roommate at CalArts who handed him that specific Mighty Boosh DVD at that specific moment in his creative development. The influences are public, the combination is private, and the privacy of the combination is what makes it art. This is the final and most important thing that Regular Show teaches about the nature of creative influence. Every artist borrows, every artist steals, every artist stands on the shoulders of the people who came before them and builds something new out of the materials they inherited. The question is not whether you borrow. The question is what you do with what you borrow. Do you display it like a trophy, showing the audience how much you know, or do you absorb it like a nutrient, letting it nourish something that grows from your own roots? Regular Show absorbed. It did not display its influences. It digested them. It broke them down into their component parts, their emotional essences, their structural principles, their tonal frequencies, and it used those components to build something that looks nothing like any of its sources but contains all of them. That is the difference between reference and transformation. That is the difference between a show that borrows and a show that creates. Regular Show borrows and creates simultaneously, and the fact that those two activities are indistinguishable in its hands is the measure of its achievement. Regular Show is the sum of its influences, but it is also more than the sum of its influences. It is the sum plus the specific human being who combined them. It is the sum plus Quintel's childhood in Hanford. It is the sum plus his years at CalArts. It is the sum plus the British roommate who handed him a Mighty Boosh DVD. It is the sum plus the feeling of playing Toe Jam and Earl at midnight. It is the sum plus the first time he watched Over the Top and thought, this arm wrestling movie is making me feel something real. It is the sum plus every moment of boredom and loneliness and creativity that led a kid from a flat town in California to build a world out of borrowed dreams. That is the answer to the question this video has been asking. What did Regular Show copy? Everything and nothing. It copied the surfaces of 100 different movies and shows and games and songs. But the core, the thing that makes all those borrowed surfaces cohere into a single unified experience, is not copied at all. The core is the relationship between two friends who do not want to grow up but know they have to, who do not want to work but know they should, who do not want to say what they feel but keep showing it through their actions. That relationship is the gravity that holds all the references together. Without it, regular show would be a trivia game. With it, regular show is a story about friendship told in the language of every story its creator ever loved. There is one more influence that needs to be addressed, and it is the one that ties everything together. It is not a movie, or a show, or a game. It is a place. Hanford, California. Quintel has described Hanford's geography as kind of flat. He has said there was not a ton to do when he was growing up. He and his friends were always looking for ways to entertain themselves. They turned nothing into something. They turned boredom into adventure. They took the raw material of a small, quiet life and built elaborate games and stories and experiences out of it, just to have something to do. That is regular show. That is the entire show. Two guys in a park with nothing to do, turning nothing into something. The premise is so simple that it almost does not seem like a premise at all. It seems like a description of nothing. Two guys, a park, boredom. That is not a pitch for a television show. That is a description of a Tuesday afternoon. But that simplicity is what makes regular show universal. Because everyone has been two guys in a park with nothing to do. Everyone has been bored. Everyone has looked at an empty afternoon and thought, what are we going to do today? And the answer to that question, in regular show as in life, is where every story begins. Quintel understood that boredom is not the absence of story. Boredom is the precondition for story. You have to have nothing before you can make something. You have to be empty before you can be filled. The flat geography of Hanford, the long afternoons with nothing to do, the VHS tapes and the Sega Genesis and the arcade machines, these were not obstacles to creativity. They were the soil in which creativity grew. Regular show is a love letter to boredom, to the specific, productive, beautiful boredom of having nothing to do and nowhere to go and no choice but to invent your own entertainment from whatever materials are at hand. That is why the show resonates so deeply with its audience. Not because the audience has fought demons, or traveled through time, or challenged death to an arm wrestling match, but because the audience has been bored, has sat on a couch with a friend and stared at a screen, and felt the infinite potential of an unscheduled afternoon, has known the feeling of time stretching out in front of them like a flat road with no destination. That is the feeling regular show begins with. Every episode, every season, every time Mordecai and Rigby sit on that couch and say nothing, and do nothing, and wait for something to happen, the show begins where all creativity begins, with boredom, with emptiness, with the quiet desperation of a person who needs something, anything, to fill the space. The park is Hanford. The boredom is Hanford's boredom. The adventures are the adventures of kids who grew up with flat landscapes and empty afternoons, and the desperate creative energy that comes from having no other options. Regular show did not just copy movies and shows and games. It copied the experience of watching those movies and shows and games in a place where they were the most exciting things that existed. It copied the feeling of a kid in Hanford sitting in front of a television, watching Over the Top or Evil Dead 2 or Dragon Ball Z, and feeling like the entire world was inside that screen. And then it put that feeling into a cartoon, and it shared it with millions of people. And those millions of people, most of whom had never been to Hanford and never would, recognized the feeling anyway. Because the feeling is not about Hanford. It is about being young and bored and hungry for something. Anything that makes you feel alive. It is about the way popular culture fills the gaps in our lives, the way movies and shows and games become more than entertainment and become a kind of emotional architecture, a scaffolding that we use to build our understanding of the world and our place in it. Regular show copied everything. But what it was really copying was the experience of being a fan. The experience of loving something so much that it becomes part of you. The experience of watching a movie and thinking, I want to make something that makes people feel the way this makes me feel. That is what J.G. Quintel did. He took everything he loved and turned it into a show that made other people love those things too. And in doing so, he proved something that every creator knows but few say out loud. Originality is not about having ideas that no one has ever had before. Originality is about arranging borrowed ideas in a pattern that could only come from you. Regular show is not original because of its ideas. It is original because of J.G. Quintel, because only he would combine the Mighty Boosh with Toe Jam and Earl. Only he would put David Lopan in a Cartoon Network show. Only he would build a bowling episode around The Big Lebowski, and a stick hockey episode around Bloodsport, and a movie night episode around Evil Dead 2, and make all of them feel like they belong in the same universe. The references are borrowed, the arrangement is his, and the arrangement is what makes it art. And there is one more thing worth saying about what happens after the borrowing. About what happens when a show that was built on other shows finishes its run and becomes, itself, something for other shows to borrow from. Regular Show premiered on September 6, 2010, and ended on January 16, 2017. In the years since, its influence has become visible in the shows that followed it. Close Enough, Quintel's next series for HBO Max, is in many ways Regular Show's spiritual sequel, applying the same escalation logic and pop culture fluency to a show about adults in their 30s. The tonal flexibility that Regular Show pioneered, the ability to shift between comedy and horror and drama and action within a single episode, has become standard practice in animated television. Shows like Amphibia, The Owl House, and Kipo and the Age of Wonder Beasts all operate with a tonal range that Regular Show helped establish as possible. The specific technique of using pop culture references not as jokes but as structural building materials has also proliferated. Regular Show proved that you could build an entire episode around a movie reference and have it work not just as a comedy, but as a genuine story with genuine emotional stakes. That proof of concept opened a door that other shows walked through. When an animated show today builds an episode around a horror movie homage or a martial arts film reference, it is operating in a space that Regular Show helped create. And the show's influence extends beyond animation. The YouTube video essay format, the very format this video occupies, owes something to Regular Show's approach to media analysis. The show taught a generation of viewers that there were layers of meaning beneath the surface of the pop culture they consumed. That a cartoon about two slackers could contain references to The Big Lebowski and Dragon Ball Z and the Mighty Boosh. That knowing those references enriched the experience. That media literacy, the ability to recognize and appreciate the web of connections between different works of art, was not just an academic exercise but a source of genuine pleasure. The explosion of video essays about cartoons and movies and TV shows that occurred in the 2010s is not unrelated to the explosion of animated shows like Regular Show that rewarded close attention and cultural knowledge. The show also changed the way a generation thinks about nostalgia. Before Regular Show, nostalgia in animated television tended to be broad and generic. Characters would reference the 80s or old movies in a vague, undifferentiated way. Regular Show's nostalgia was surgical. It referenced specific movies, specific games, specific songs, specific technologies. It taught its audience that the specificity of nostalgia is what gives it power. That remembering the 80s is not the same as remembering the exact sound a VHS tape makes when you slide it into the machine. That the difference between vague nostalgia and specific nostalgia is the difference between feeling nothing and feeling everything. This specificity has become a cultural value. The audience that grew up watching Regular Show is now the audience that makes TikTok videos about the specific feel of N64 controllers, that writes essays about the specific aesthetic of Y2K graphic design, that creates entire online communities around the specific memories of specific childhood experiences. Regular Show did not create this culture of hyper-specific nostalgia, but it modeled it. It showed that specificity was valuable, that the small details of your personal history were worth remembering and worth sharing, that the movies you watched and the games you played and the music you listened to when you were young were not trivial but foundational. And perhaps most importantly, Regular Show showed that borrowing is not a sign of creative weakness. It is a sign of creative health. A show that borrows from everywhere is a show that is connected to everything. It is a show that exists in conversation with the entire history of the medium and every medium adjacent to it. It is a show that says, nothing exists in isolation. Every story is connected to every other story. Every creator is connected to every other creator. We are all links in a chain that stretches back to the first person who ever sat around a fire and said, "Let me tell you about something that happened." Regular Show is a link in that chain. It received influences from the Mighty Boosh and Beavis and Butthead and Toe Jam and Earl and Evil Dead 2 and The Big Lebowski and Dragon Ball Z and The Wizard and Christine and Back to the Future and Star Wars and Bloodsport and Over the Top and Weekend at Bernie's and The King of Kong and Rocko's Modern Life and Flapjack and The Simpsons and 100 other works that space and time do not permit us to name. And it passed those influences forward, transformed and enriched, to the shows and creators and audiences that came after it. The chain continues. The borrowing continues. The transformation continues. That is not a weakness. That is life. That is how culture works. That is how art works. That is how human beings work. We absorb. We transform. We pass forward. We are all made of the people we have met, and the stories we have heard, and the experiences we have had. We are all composites. We are all patchworks. We are all, in the deepest and most literal sense, copies of the things we love. Regular Show understood this. It understood it more fully and more honestly than almost any other show in the history of television, and it made something extraordinary out of that understanding. Before we move on to the end, if you are enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. There is a version of this story where Regular Show is a lesser show for all its borrowing, where the references are a crutch, a way of avoiding the hard work of original creation. But that is not what happened. What happened is that a kid from Hanford, California, grew up watching everything he could get his hands on, absorbed it all, carried it with him to CalArts and then to Cartoon Network, and used it as the raw material for one of the most distinctive, most emotionally resonant, most genuinely beloved animated shows of its generation. He did not hide his influences. He celebrated them. He did not pretend to be original. He was honest about where everything came from. And that honesty, that willingness to say, I learned this from Over the Top, and this from the Mighty Boosh, and this from a Sega Genesis game I played when I was 9, is what gives Regular Show its integrity. The show knows what it is. It knows where it came from, and it is proud of every borrowed brick in its foundation. That is the story of everything Regular Show copied. It is the story of a show that was made of other shows, and it is the story of how being made of other shows does not make you less real. It makes you more real, because all of us are made of the stories we have consumed. All of us are composites of the movies, and the music, and the games, and the conversations that shaped us. Regular Show is not unusual for being a patchwork of influences. Regular Show is unusual for being honest about it, for wearing its influences on its sleeve, for saying, without shame or apology, this is what I love, and this is what I made from it. Look at it. It is imperfect. It is derivative, and it is entirely, unmistakably, beautifully mine. Let us talk about what it means to fall asleep to this, to listen to this analysis as you drift off, half hearing the names of movies and episodes and characters, letting the rhythm of the narration carry you toward unconsciousness. There is something fitting about that, because Regular Show is, at its heart, a show about the state between waking and sleeping, the state between reality and fantasy, the state between the mundane and the magical. Every episode begins in the waking world. Mordecai and Rigby are at the park. They have a task. They have a routine. The world is ordinary. And then, gradually, the ordinary dissolves. The edges blur. Something impossible intrudes. And suddenly, they are in a different world entirely. A world where the rules have changed, where anything can happen, where the boundaries between what is real and what is not have become negotiable. That is the threshold of sleep. That is the moment when consciousness softens and the unconscious begins to assert itself. That is the moment when the stories you have consumed during the day start to reshape themselves in your mind, combining and recombining in ways that your waking brain would never permit. Regular Show lives in that threshold. It is a show that takes the logic of dreams and applies it to the logic of narrative. In a dream, you can be at work one moment and on another planet the next, and the transition feels completely natural. In Regular Show, Mordecai can be mowing the lawn one moment and fighting a cosmic entity the next, and the transition feels completely natural. The show borrows the emotional logic of dreams, the way dreams give equal weight to trivial details and existential crises, the way dreams shift between the familiar and the alien without warning or explanation. And so, as you listen to this, and the words begin to blur, as the names of movies and episodes start to lose their sharpness and become just sounds, just rhythms, just patterns of emphasis and silence. Know that you are experiencing something very close to what regular show is. You are experiencing the dissolution of boundaries. The line between the analysis and the show it describes is thinning. The line between waking thought and sleeping thought is thinning. The line between you and the stories you have heard tonight is thinning. And in that thinning, something new is being created. Something that belongs only to you. A synthesis of everything you have heard, filtered through your own memories and associations and feelings, producing a version of regular show that exists nowhere else in the universe except inside your mind, right now, in this moment, as you drift. That is what regular show would want. The show that was built from other shows would want you to take it apart and rebuild it inside yourself, to absorb it the way it absorbed its influences, to carry it forward into your own dreams, your own stories, your own understanding of what it means to take the things you love and make something new from them. Sit with that for a moment. There is one more thing to say before we reach the end. Something about the act of watching itself. About what it means to spend 2 hours listening to someone talk about a show you love. About the specific form of attention that a video essay asks of you and the specific form of intimacy that that attention creates. When you watch regular show, you are watching a show that watches other shows. When you listen to this video, you are listening to someone who watches a show that watches other shows. The layers of attention stack on top of each other. Quintel watched the Mighty Boosh. He put what he learned into regular show. You watched regular show. You are now listening to an analysis of what regular show learned from the Mighty Boosh. And somewhere, at some point, someone will watch this video essay and be inspired by something in it, and they will make something of their own, and the chain of influence will extend another link. That chain is the real subject of this video, not the specific movies regular show copied, not the specific games or shows or songs. The chain, the unbroken line of creative transmission that connects every storyteller to every other storyteller, every work of art to every other work of art, every moment of inspiration to every other moment of inspiration. Regular show is one bead on that chain, a bright, strange, beautiful bead that catches the light in a way that no other bead does. But it is still part of the chain. It did not create itself from nothing, and the things it creates will not exist in isolation. That is the final comfort this video offers. The comfort of connection. The comfort of knowing that the things you love are part of something larger. That the show you fell asleep to as a kid is connected to the Mighty Boosh and the Big Lebowski and Evil Dead 2 and Dragon Ball Z and Toe Jam and Earl and The Wizard and every other piece of culture that ever made someone feel something and inspired them to make something of their own. You are part of that chain too. Every time you watch something and feel something and tell someone about it, you are extending the chain. You are doing what Quintel did. You are doing what regular show did. You are taking what you love and passing it forward. Now let us bring this home. There is a scene near the end of the series finale, a regular epic final battle, which aired on January 16, 2017. The characters are saying goodbye, not just to each other, to the park, to the world they built, to everything they shared over 8 seasons and 244 episodes. And in that moment, all the references fall away. There is no 80s movie logic. There is no anime energy. There is no arcade game structure. There is just a group of friends, standing in a place they love, knowing that they have to leave it. The emotion is not borrowed. The emotion is earned. And it is earned precisely because of all the borrowing that came before it. Because every reference, every homage, every stolen plot structure, and every borrowed fight sequence was in service of this, building a world that felt real enough to mourn, creating characters that felt human enough to miss, telling a story that, for all its copied pieces, added up to something that could only have come from this show, from these characters, from this particular combination of borrowed dreams and original heart. Regular show copied everything, and in copying everything, it became something no one had ever seen before. That is not a contradiction. That is the way creation works. That is the way it has always worked. You take what you love, you arrange it in a way that only you could arrange it. And you trust that the arrangement, if it is honest enough and specific enough and true enough to who you are, will become its own kind of original. Regular Show is that kind of original, built from borrowed pieces, held together by genuine love, and impossible to mistake for anything else. The show premiered on September 6, 2010. It ended on January 16, 2017. 244 episodes, 8 seasons, 1 movie, countless references, countless homages, countless borrowed structures and stolen plot points, and repurposed character dynamics. And through all of it, one steady, unbroken thread, well, the friendship between a blue jay and a raccoon who just wanted to have a good time. Mordecai and Rigby did not save the world because they were heroes. They saved the world because they were friends, because they had each other, because the bond between them, the bond that was born in a CalArts dorm room and refined over 7 years of animated television, was strong enough to hold even when the universe was falling apart around them. That bond is not copied from anything. It is not borrowed from any movie or show or game. It is the one truly original thing in a show built entirely from borrowed pieces. And it is the thing that makes all the borrowed pieces matter. Without the friendship, the Evil Dead references are just references. Without the friendship, the Big Lebowski homages are just homages. Without the friendship, the anime fight sequences are just spectacle, and the 80s music is just nostalgia, and the horror elements are just scares. The friendship is the catalyst that transforms all of these borrowed elements into something alive. It is the heat that fuses them together. It is the gravity that holds them in orbit. It is the reason the show works. And it is the reason the show endures. Because the movies it references will age. The games it homages will become obsolete. The music it uses will fall out of fashion. But the friendship will not. The feeling of having someone who knows you, who puts up with you, who makes you better even when you do not want to be better. That feeling does not have an expiration date. That feeling is the oldest story in the world. Older than Homer, older than Gilgamesh, older than language itself. Two people, side by side, facing whatever comes. Regular Show copied that story, and it told it beautifully. 244 episodes. That number deserves a moment of reflection. 244 times, the show's writers and animators and voice actors sat down and made something. 244 times, they took a blank page and filled it with a story. 244 times, they reached into the vast library of pop culture and personal experience and creative intuition that Regular Show drew from, and they pulled out something new. Something that had never existed before. Something that, despite being assembled from borrowed parts, was entirely and unmistakably theirs. That is a staggering amount of creative output. And the consistency of quality across those 244 episodes is remarkable. The show does not have a bad season. It has stronger episodes and weaker episodes, certainly, but it does not have the kind of catastrophic decline that plagues so many long-running animated series. The reason for that consistency is the same reason the show works at all: the borrowing. Because when you have the entire history of cinema and television and gaming and music and literature to draw from, you never run out of material. You never have to invent from nothing. You always have a starting point, a foundation, a borrowed structure that you can build on. The breadth of Regular Show's influences is not just an aesthetic choice. It is a survival strategy. It is what allowed the show to produce 24 to 40 episodes per season for 8 years without ever feeling like it was running on fumes. The park is quiet now. The characters have grown up and moved on. The VHS tapes are in storage. The arcade machines are unplugged. The cassette tapes have been rewound for the last time. But the show remains, sitting on a shelf somewhere, waiting to be picked up, waiting to be watched, waiting to be absorbed by the next generation of kids who are bored and looking for something, anything, that makes them feel alive. And when those kids find it, when they press play and hear the theme song and watch Mordecai and Rigby sit on that couch and argue about nothing, they will not know about the Mighty Boosh. They will not recognize the Bloodsport reference, or the Big Lebowski dialogue, or the Evil Dead visual homage. They will not know that the escalation pattern comes from a specific tradition, or that the horror elements borrow from a specific lineage, or that the fight sequences use anime grammar. They will not know any of that, but they will feel it. They will feel the accumulated weight of everything the show borrowed. They will feel the decades of storytelling wisdom that Quintel absorbed and transformed and embedded in every frame. They will feel the love that went into every reference, every homage, every carefully chosen piece of borrowed material. They will not know where the feeling comes from. They will just know that this show makes them feel something, that this show is different, that this show, for reasons they cannot articulate, matters. And that is the final proof that regular show's borrowing worked. Not that scholars can trace its references, not that fans can compile lists of homages, not that critics can name its influences. The proof is in the feeling that remains after the references have been forgotten. The feeling that a kid in a flat town somewhere feels when they watch two slackers at a park turn nothing into something. The feeling that regular show gave to its audience, and that its audience will carry forward, unaware of its origins, into the stories they tell, and the things they create, and the friendships they build. That feeling is borrowed from everywhere, and it belongs to everyone. If you enjoyed this video essay, make sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next.